The atmosphere is filled with heavy sadness as she mourns their loss. Tears flow freely, and deep despair reigns in her heart like the embrace of a cold wind. She clings tightly to her grandfather's last relative. For as long as she can remember, she has always felt this unrelenting burden. Her grandfather was always her reliable support. He was her protector after the tragic death of her parents. Since then, Yoon Seol vowed to do everything to make her grandfather happy, but even the strongest anchors weaken with time. Yoon Seol recently learned the terrible truth her grandfather was in the late stages of pancreatic cancer. His days were numbered. He asked if he wanted to see her wedding before he left for eternity. It was always difficult for her to make such decisions. Marriage? Yeon was too young for this. Everything seemed rushed and thoughtless. Her heart was beating in her chest with fervor, making her think about the future. However, her grandfather's concern for her future made her stop and think about it. At the university, Sungyeon turned to Yeon Sol, her carefree and attractive friend who always cheered her up. An idea got stuck in her head, and she decided to get him out of the audience. Once outside, a light breeze enveloped them. She paused for a moment, hesitating before taking an important step. And then Kyun heard these words. "So, Kun, will you agree to be my wife?" Suki froze in place, stunned by the surprise. And then a big smile appeared on her face. "Of course it's sudden. But how can you refuse when you're the one making the offer?" He said this and added with a laugh. "But let's get married when we're 30. Okay?" Yoo and Sil opened their mouths to explain something, but him. At that moment, the phone rang, unexpectedly interrupting her words. One of his friends invited him to meet some pretty girls nearby. Sokyun's smile grew even wider. "That sounds like fun. Let's continue tomorrow, Yoon Seol." "I have to go now," he said. Yoon Seol forced a smile. Okay. Go, I was just kidding." Seokyun laughed lightly, pinching her cheeks. He knew this, but his heart still beat faster with excitement. After these words, he smiled, waved goodbye, and moved on. Leaving the campus, Yeonseol watched his receding figure, feeling her heart tighten with anxiety. Upset. She muttered under her breath. What have I done? Why expect something from someone who is never serious? Her thoughts were whirling. Will you ever take me seriously? Is my face not serious enough? Deep in her thoughts, she suddenly ran into someone. Out of surprise, she looked up and hurriedly apologized. A man with a cold expression on his face interrupted her with a stern remark. Next time, be more careful where you go, don't fly in the clouds. Annoyed by his tone, Yoo and Seol exploded. If you saw that I was wandering in my thoughts, you could have bypassed me. Instead, you bumped into me on purpose, didn't you? However, the boy did not have time to answer when a car sped by the girl, dangerously approaching her. With a decisive movement, the boy grabbed her hand and pulled her out of danger in an instant. The momentum caused her to crash right into his chest. Their faces almost touched each other. Their lips accidentally met. It seemed that time froze for a moment. Realizing what had happened, he immediately retreated, letting her go. Yoon-sel swayed and her face turned pale. Don't get me wrong, he said coldly, shaking the dust off his sleeve. The car was going too fast. I just wanted to protect you. So thank you, she stammered. She straightened, avoiding his gaze. Let's pretend nothing happened. We're both having a rough day. Without waiting for an answer, she turned decisively to leave. But before she could escape, his mocking voice pierced the air. His sly smile pierced the space. You won't even thank me for saving a life? Do you want to leave without thanking for that kiss? His eyes shone with cunning. Unsol, not yet recovered from the recent danger, frankly answers, What kind of kiss? Our lips barely touched. Don't think of making such a drama out of it. Never kissed before? Her voice is full of sarcasm. The man smiled slightly with a defiant look. Where does such confidence come from? In fact, you look like you've never kissed anyone before. Laughing, he contemptuously threw. And what is special about you? I don't even remember kissing you. His smile got even wider. Really? The first kiss is so easily forgotten. Her anger flared at his joking tone. You're imagining too much. For your information, you're only the 108th person I've kissed, so I'm sorry if it was minor. She turned sharply. Her voice sounded sharply, adding, And don't you dare talk to me if we meet again, you shameless boy. He stood watching her walk away with indignation, and a cheerful spark played in his eyes. Wow, it was really 108th Ma, right? He thought with a smile. He muttered, I wonder, as a thin smile froze on his face as he watched her disappearing figure return to the university yard. Won-sil sat at the lecture confused. Friends around her were joking and discussing the upcoming parties, but her thoughts wandered far from all this. Seokhyun was always the soul of the company, generously showering jokes, and his carefree smile illuminated everyone around, lifting the mood. Suddenly, the professor entered the audience, instantly stopping the chaotic noise, saying, "Good morning to everyone." He started with seriousness and expectation. His voice sounded serious. "Today we will have a special guest teacher who will join us for the next semester." He introduced himself in a calm, even voice. "Good morning, my name is Kang Jin-young." Eun-seol froze. Her eyes widened in disbelief. She gripped her notebook tightly. Her face froze in a combination of shock and confusion. Her mind screamed, "Be that annoying person from yesterday." The girl's face burned with shame as she hid even lower in her chair. Her panic grew as his eyes slowly moved around the classroom. She bent over her notebook, whispering, "Maybe I was wrong. Let it be so." Suddenly, his voice rang out distinctly and sharply, cutting through the clamor of the class like a knife through paper. The teacher sharply turned to the student who was tightly holding the book in his hands. "You are the one who hugs this book. What is your name?" Choi Yoon-sul froze in shock. "I am Choi Yoon-sul, sir." She stammered, trying to collect her thoughts. A sly smile appeared on his lips. "Miss Choi." He began casually. He never thought that biting a book helps to absorb its content. The class burst into laughter and Yoon-sul's face flushed. She did not have time to recover as his smile became even wider. So he said carelessly, "Turning the page, explain to us page 108. Her heart froze for a moment before his next words. "Oh, sorry," he added with a suspicious smile in his voice, making everyone tense in anticipation. He looked at her with a mischievous glint in his eyes. "Page 108. Go on, Miss Choi. Please enlighten us." His smile grew wider, enjoying her embarrassment. After class was over, Sujin casually greeted Professor King. Sujin cheerfully asked why he didn't say that he teaches here and offered to drink coffee. King Jun-young kept a polite distance in his answer. After class, he had several urgent matters. In addition, he thought that it was not entirely appropriate for a professor and a student to drink coffee together. A classmate asked Sujin in surprise, "Do you know him?" She nodded indifferently. "Yes, our families know each other." Later, Kyungwoon's friend Yoon-seol offered to have dinner. He really wanted Jimpong, but Yoon-seol refused the invitation. She refused with a weak smile, saying, "I'll just go home. I'm tired." Making her way through the corridor, she suddenly noticed a familiar figure in front of her. It was Kang Jun-young. Gathering all her courage, she called Mr. King. "Can we talk?" He stopped and turned to her. His penetrating gaze met hers. She hesitated but began, "Sorry for our first meeting. Can we not move our question to class?" He asked in a hard-to-recognize tone. "Don't you remember me?" His smile returned, reflecting the slight pleasure in his eyes. He never brought personal problems to class, playing the role of a professor who always had everything under control. He advised the students, his voice almost tinged with sarcasm, not to be arrogant. Her lips parted in surprise, but no sound escaped. He turned and walked away, leaving her standing motionless as her emotions welled up inside her. That evening, she returned to her apartment filled with memories. Yoon-seol's phone rang and the display showed a call from Grandpa. She answered the call without delay. Grandfather greeted her with a happy voice. "Yoon-seol, how are you?" She replied with a smile. "I'm fine, Grandpa." "And how are you?" Grandpa had a good laugh. "Haha, I'm doing great Saturday. I'll be in town meeting an old friend's son." "Join us." She agreed because she had no plans. "I'll pick you up then. See you soon," he added. The call ended, leaving her staring fixedly at the phone screen. The next day, there was a fresh coolness in the air as Yoon-sil and her grandfather set out for the luxurious estate. With warmth in his voice, Grandpa Kang Taejin greeted the guest as he approached them. Yoon-seol's grandfather joked with a smile on his face that the owner of such a large company should not personally greet guests at the gate. However, he could not help but go out to meet King Taejin. laughingly admitting that he wanted to personally congratulate this young lady. Her grandfather smilingly introduced her to King Tajin and his wife Shuk, as she bowed politely. "These are the children of my late friend Kang Dong-woo," he said fondly, recalling the past. The children recalled how their close friends were not only friends with their parents, but also owned TJ Corpo. Yoon-sil greeted with a warm smile. "Nice to meet you." Taejin warmly commented on how beautifully Yoon-sil had grown. "Come inside," added Hisuk, pointing to the grand entrance. During the walk, Taehyung remarked that the Hisuk family had made a significant contribution to the development of his family. "Without you, TJ Corp would not have reached such heights," he said gratefully. "Don't say that," her grandfather interjected, brushing off the compliment. When they entered, a regionally served table was waiting for them. There was guilt in his voice. He admitted that he regretted not finding time to talk to her and her grandfather after her parents died. Haesak gently interrupted him. Her voice was soft and soothing. "Don't bring up such a difficult topic now, dear." Taegan quickly changed the atmosphere with a warm smile. "Yoon-sul, if you want. Consider yourself part of our family. I would love to have a daughter, a younger sister, and an older brother for my children." Haesak smiled playfully, shaking her head. "Tajin, you're going to disappoint her. Always dreamed of a daughter, but now you are so eager to grab the opportunity." Tagan turned around proudly, turning his head. "Here he is, our second son, Sunichin Sayo. Say hello to him," he exclaimed, making everyone around him happy. The young man bowed politely. "Pleased to meet you. My name is Kang Jun Seo." As they talked, hollow, confident footsteps filled the hallway. All heads turned at the same time as the firstborn confidently entered the room. The atmosphere tensed up in an instant. Young-sol met Kang Jun-yoon's gaze with the same one who had recently saved her from a crazy car. Their gaze was filled with invisible sparks. Her eyes were startled and opened wide. They both froze, their gazes intertwined in disbelief at the unexpectedness of the situation. Jin-young was the first to break the silence. "Fate, you do have a sense of humor, don't you?" he said, his voice bristling with a mixture of irony and surprise. And Sol took a deep breath, trying to control her irritation. "Maybe we should start from the beginning?" "Thank you for saving my life," she said in a polite but careful tone. Jin Young's eyes sparkled slyly. "Oh, you said you don't remember, but it turns out that you do remember." Our Ki Ji suddenly interrupted Yoon Soo, blushing. "No details, please." With an awkward smile, she assured that she remembers everything. He laughed lightly. "Extracurricular, just call me Zhenyun." Yun Xiao straightened up and shook her head in denial. "How could that be? You are older and much more experienced." His smile grew even wider. "Oh, experienced, you say? Do you mean the first kiss?" "But I can't match you. You already had 108 of them," he added mockingly. Her face was burning red as she stuttered and glared at him. He chuckled slightly as he remained calm. "Isn't that right, Miss Choi?" Her frustration reached the limit. "You are unbearable. Because of my grandfather and your parents, I'm trying to be polite, but you..." She pointed a finger at him. "Be careful. Outside we are strangers, understood?" He just shrugged his shoulders and answered, "Just the way I want." There's no point in pretending to be polite. He leaned a little closer and added that it never suited him to pretend. Turning to leave, Yoon-sel froze in place. Her fists clenched tightly as irritation welled up inside. After returning to college, Yoon-sel confided in her friend a secret. She was looking for a partner for marriage and even proposed to Seokyeon. The girlfriend couldn't believe. "How can you marry anyone so easily?" she exclaimed in shock. She pounced on her with the words that she needed an adult and experienced person, not the first best person to fill her life with. Suddenly, her friend's face lit up when the idea came to her. "I know. My aunt runs a marriage agency. Let's arrange a blind date for you." And without hesitation added, "I will organize it for this Saturday." On Saturday, in a cozy hotel, Yeon-sel looked forward to seeing her dating partner, which was organized especially for her. In the end, when he appeared, he politely introduced himself, bowing his head slightly as a sign of respect. However, he quickly got lost in a long monologue about his unsurpassed appearance. The following Saturday, she met another man who fanatically controlled his diet and did not even allow her to enjoy food without restrictions. As the weeks went by, Yoon-sul met different men. Some were too bold and tried to woo her directly. Others believed in ghosts and told scary stories that caused anxiety. It became more and more obvious to her how difficult it is to find a suitable companion. One Saturday afternoon, she met a man who impressed her with his sincerity. Suddenly, deep in thought about what happened, she recklessly dropped a cup of tea. The man quickly handed her his handkerchief with a caring smile. This small gesture awakened a glimmer of hope in her. Maybe she will find a decent husband after all. In the same hotel on the other side, Junghyun was sitting in a chair arguing with his mother on the phone. "Why do you promise without my consent?" he asked irritably, feeling his patience disappear. His mother calmly explained, "It's not me. My friend saw how well your company works and wanted to introduce you to her daughter." As soon as he finished the call, he heard someone calling his name. In front of him stood a young woman beaming with a bright smile. Remembering his mother's words, Jinyeon looked intently at the stranger, trying to look serious. The stranger suddenly smiled as she recognized Jinyeon. "You don't seem like a stranger. We saw each other at Prince Ivan's birthday party last year, remember?" Without waiting for an answer, she began to talk about how she could help develop his business by taking advantage of her connections with Prince Jinyoung. Listening more and more annoyed by her incessant chatter, Jinyoung finally stood up and said with a polite smile, "It was nice to meet you, but I have business to go to." The girl quickly noticed that she came late and with a polite smile offered to go first so as not to disturb. As soon as she got to the exit, Junyoung sighed and, with relief, he leaned back in his chair, relaxing, finally enjoying the long-awaited silence. At the other end of the hotel, the unsale meeting was successfully held, with participants actively discussing important issues. The man began the conversation by politely inquiring about her family's affairs. However, suddenly his tone changed. He suddenly admitted, "I spent 30 million to find someone who is equal to me." Unsal was confused. Her face expressed obvious surprise. Noticing her reaction, the man suddenly grabbed her hand and spoke. "Don't lie to me. I know people like you, low-paid and hopeless. Follow me to the room or I will report you," he said desperately. Her anger boiled over and she responded sharply, "Tell the police at least, I'm not afraid." And at this very moment, suddenly the air was cut by a familiar voice of Junyoung, who was just passing by. As if there was no movement, he stopped in place. The men continued to ignore her resistance. "If you need money, I can help you get it quick," one of them defiantly suggested. Ansel clenched her teeth, trying to control her anger. One of them wanted to say something else, but suddenly another person grabbed his hand firmly. Suddenly, everyone shuddered and looked up, only to see Chunhyun standing nearby, glaring in the man's direction. His grip tightened with a cold expression on his face. This made the man jerk back with a cry of pain. Casually, Jin Young grabbed Yun's hands and twisted them, avoiding the chaos that reigned around. Quickly getting her out of danger, Jin Young left the chaos behind as Yoon Sol struggled to keep up, stumbling and barely keeping up with his quick steps. She breathlessly said, "Thank you. I don't know what would happen if you weren't around." She glanced at her hand and, "Jin Young can let it go now." Letting go of her hand, he couldn't help but ask, "So you came here on a blind date?" Annoyed, she replied that it was none of his business and did not concern him at all. Yoon Young turned to her with a cheeky smile. "Judging by your outfit, it was a date, right?" His assumption sounded like a provocative challenge. If that guy's words were true, her face wouldn't have turned red and she wouldn't have denied it in a hurry. She sighed and sat down on the nearest chair. Taking a deep breath, she explained, "My grandfather is sick. It is his last wish to see me married. My friends." She decided to use the services of a marriage agency run by On, hoping for a quick result. Chunyoung's face turned serious as he asked, "Isn't marriage and love every woman's dream? Is it really okay to go on a blind date like this?" Sighing, she said, "It's not easy, but I don't need love. The only thing I want is to become a wife for my grandfather's happiness." Junyoung looked at her thoughtfully, his forehead tensed in thought. She spoke softly. "I thought that man was a good person. I thought that I would finally be able to fulfill my grandfather's dream." Without another word, a man named Jin Young walked over, pulled out a chair, and sat next to her. Jin Young thought for a moment, calculating something in his mind before, finally looked at her and spoke. "Choi Yoon Sile, just marry me." Yoon Sil froze in surprise for a moment, completely confused. After a second, she nervously laughed, replying that it must be a joke. But his look remained serious. And didn't you say that you wouldn't refuse if someone asked you to marry him? He asked, her laughter verse. Why does it have to be you? Junyoung leaned forward and calmly explained that it was beneficial for both of them. They fit each other's criteria and their families know each other. Her grandfather will be happy if she marries him. She asked suspiciously. And what will you get out of it? He replied, I need the status of a man as much as you need the title of a woman. Realization came over her and her eyes widened. Did you come here too for... He cut her off firmly. That's exactly what I mean. I don't want to waste time on meaningless meetings. Married to someone else, I have to consider their feelings, and you're only interested in the title. It's a convenience for both of us. She looked at him thoughtfully and muttered that it was difficult for her to imagine them as a couple. After a pause, she hesitantly asked if she could have some time to think. With a confident smile, Junyeon replied, Okay, I'll give you 3 days. On the 3rd day at 5 p.m., meet at the parking lot where we first met. If she doesn't show up, it means that she refuses his offer. 3 days later, everyone gathered in the parking lot waiting for her to make her choice. The tension in the air was almost palpable. Jin Young stood there, keeping his promise, eagerly waiting. He glanced at the clock, 16:50. It was almost evening. His eyes carefully explored the quiet, deserted road ahead, and the minutes flew by inexorably. He checked the time again. It was already 17:10. Disappointed, he unlocked the door of his car, thoughtfully thinking, what did I even expect when I came here? As soon as he was about to get into the car, a voice called his name suddenly sounded from behind. He turned around and saw Yoon Seol hurrying towards him, a little out of breath. Yoon Seol breathlessly apologized in a hurry. Please forgive me. My lesson took longer than I expected. Junyeon's expression remained serious as he responded. She was 10 minutes late. Still trying to catch her breath, she answered that she agreed to accept his offer, but put forward one condition. She straightened with a confident look at him. She wanted the marriage to remain a secret until graduation. After all, his popularity on campus could turn into a real disaster for her if the secret was revealed. Jin Young gave a faint smile and nodded in response. Good, he said with hidden admiration. He held out his hand for a handshake, saying, In this case, it was a pleasure to cooperate with Miss Choi. But suddenly he abruptly pulled her closer to him. She suddenly found herself in his arms and he held her tightly, preventing her from falling. Surprised, she put her hands on his chest, trying to push away. What are you doing? Just hug me like this? She exclaimed. He smiled slyly as he approached. So aren't we a couple now? We should behave accordingly. The majestic mansion of the kingdom was illuminated by 1,000 candles, creating a mysterious atmosphere during the dinner. The tension in the air grew as all eyes turned to Junyoung. He had just announced that he had important news that should surprise the audience. With a casual expression on his face, he declared, I am going to marry Choi Yoon-sale. Father's face lit up with happiness. Mr. Choi's granddaughter? This is great news, he exclaimed, while a shadow of concern appeared on Mrs. Kang's face. His father nodded with an encouraging expression on his face. I sensed it back during their visit, but I wasn't sure he said. Jin Young replied calmly. We have been dating for a long time, but I didn't know our parents knew each other. Mrs. Kang frowned. She kept her voice restrained, but asked directly, How long have you been together? You only started teaching her. Marriage doesn't feel like a rushed decision last week, right? Junyoon stopped his watchful gaze on the interlocutor. We have known each other long before I started teaching at her campus. I just didn't tell you. He replied with a slight smile. A small smile lit up his face as he added, This is why I don't like it when you try to set me up with your friends' daughters. Don't worry, Mom. I'm marrying her because I love her. Ms. King's eyes widened in surprise as a wave of panic washed over her, but she quickly gathered her thoughts. She wondered if he even knows what true love is. Annoyed, she clutched the fork in her hand as if trying to quell the storm of emotions raging inside. Though her face remained impassive, with a strained smile she spoke. She suggested, Why don't you bring her here? I would like to talk to her personally. Yoon Sul was stunned by the news she heard over the phone. Sul asked worriedly, What if she suspects something? Yoon-chun kept calm and said, Stick to the plan answer as discussed. I will wait at the usual place. Don't be late. When the call ended, Yoon-soo was left looking at the phone, anxiety weighing on her heart. How can I keep calm? Flashed through her mind. The next day, everything changed at the king's estate. Mrs. Kang greeted her with displeasure. She scolded how could Junghyun leave her alone so easily. In an awkward situation, she explained that Junghyun replied that he had urgent business, so she came alone. Mrs. King looked at her carefully and spoke. She was still a college student, and Mrs. King asked her if it was too soon. She straightened up and firmly replied that they had decided to keep it a secret until graduation. Mrs. Kang squinted suspiciously and asked in a hoarse voice, "How long have you been dating?" Ms. Kang narrowed her eyes and emphasized the question without hiding her disbelief. "And why didn't you inform us earlier?" Sensing the tension, Yoon Sale tried to calm her down. "We're really serious about this," she said it confidently, keeping her voice calm. Ms. Kang calmed down a bit. Her face softened. "It's not that I don't like you," she said thoughtfully. "I just have a few questions." She looked at Yoon Seol carefully. Her gaze was serious. "Do you really love my son?" she asked, putting her whole soul into this question. Anazale tried to be as sincere as possible. "Yes, I love him with all my heart," she said, feeling her words ring in the tense silence. Mrs. Kang narrowed her eyes and asked a second time, "Does Junyoung love you?" Yunsul froze, her mind frantically searching for an answer. For a moment, Yunsul wanted to answer when suddenly a familiar voice interrupted her thoughts. "Mom, shouldn't you be asking me about this?" Unsale shuddered when Unyoung entered the room, putting his arms around her shoulders and pulling her clothes. Hugging her tighter, he turned to Mrs. Kang. "I told you we love each other. What else do I need to convince you?" He looked at Yoon Seol, a playful smile playing on his lips. "Mom isn't asking something strange, dear?" he asked. Yoon Seol shook her head a little awkwardly, answering, "No, she's just worried about you." Mrs. King was watching this conversation carefully, and her face was becoming more and more worried. When they left the house, the atmosphere was as tense as a string that was about to break. Moonlight asked, disgruntled, "Why did you act like that?" Her voice clearly showing irritation, Jin Young replied calmly, "Otherwise, Mom wouldn't have believed us." "There was no need to hug me," she protested. He could barely contain his smile. "You would have seen your face when she asked you those questions. You looked so embarrassed, especially when I hugged you," she sighed, thinking how was it not to feel awkward? They barely knew each other, and he didn't even warn her in advance. Driving up to her house, the girl quietly whispered her gratitude and began to carefully get out of the car. But just as she was about to leave, Junyoung suddenly grabbed her arm and pulled her back. Junyoung carefully raised his hand to his lips and kissed it gently. "Maybe we should practice," he added with a charming smile. He winked with a cheerful smile. Her eyes widened in surprise and her cheeks flushed. "Practicing?" she stammered, completely confused. "Practice like this," he said with confidence. "We should look like a real couple on every occasion." She pulled her hand away and answered decisively, "No, we don't need it. I'll handle it myself." He laughed. "Look, you're already confused, just like now." He leaned closer, looking at her playfully. Her face was getting redder as the heat rose to her cheeks. In a panic, she pushed him back. "I said, I don't need it," she exclaimed resolutely. She shouted and jumped out of the car without wasting a second. As soon as she left the car, her phone rang. Seeing her grandfather's name on the display, she immediately answered the call. On the other end of the phone came the warm and cheerful conversation of grandfather. "If you had told me earlier, I would have immediately agreed to your marriage." Hearing his joy, she couldn't hold back a smile, although a slight anxiety nevertheless entered her heart. It was too late to retreat now, she thought. After the call ended, she returned to the car, trying to collect her thoughts and find confidence in her actions. She leaned through the car window and said with a smile, "Well, let's practice then." He hesitated, asking with a strange uncertainty in his voice, "Do we really need to practice kissing?" He glanced at her. His eyes glittered with mischief. "Well, what do you think?" Without waiting for an answer, he confidently hugged her neck and gently took her face in his hands. The next moment, his lips were on hers. She froze, her eyes widened in shock. Time seemed to stand still while the moment lasted. Their kiss grew deeper and deeper, drawing her further and further into an irresistible entanglement of feelings. The moment seemed to last an eternity. Jin Yeon smiled and pulled away. It was a wedding kiss, he said casually, giving her a moment of serenity amidst the exciting events. He ran his thumb lightly over her lips. "We're getting married soon, so it's a good idea to practice a little, right?" Winked with a sly smile. Still embarrassed, she nodded without saying a word and quickly left. Inside the car, Junyoung leaned into the back of the seat while relaxing the tension in his neck. His cheeks reddened slightly as the recent incident replayed in his mind. The next day, the atmosphere at the university was tense. Yoonse looked intently at her friends and once again lost herself in the memories of her conversation with Junyeon. She thoughtfully asked Junyeon if she could entrust the secret to one of her friends because she needed support. He silently nodded in agreement. She looked around at her friends hesitantly. She couldn't decide which of them she could trust with her secret. Later, she spoke to Yingun, gathering her courage. "I need to talk to you about something," she said, trying to hide her excitement. Yoon smiled enigmatically as he joked, "Are you going to get married or something?" Clumsily, but frankly, she answered, "Yes, actually." Hyonin froze with wide eyes in shock. "What? Who?" Eunseol carefully led her to a quiet place so that no one else would overhear. Left alone, Eunseol took a deep breath and said, "I will marry Mr. King." Younggon pointed an accusing finger at her. "I knew it. I felt that something was happening between the two of you." "Shh," she whispered more quietly, trying to calm him down. "Only you know this, so please keep it a secret." Her friend nodded and hugged her tightly. "Congratulations, you finally found your way." In an instant, Jonan's smile disappeared into concern. "Why is he proposing? What are his motives?" Yoonseol decided to be honest. "He is just like me. He needs a social position and doesn't want to waste time." Kyunghyun thought for a moment before asking himself, could he be the one who saved me? He couldn't forget all those awkward blind dates. Could it be that Yongse was that mysterious person who always came to the rescue? Hyunggun smiles slyly. "Is that your white knight, right? Always on a white horse to save the day." While Goon's imagination played out to the full, Yoon Seal just rolled her eyes. But before she could answer, Kyun appeared behind them. "What are you whispering?" he asked cheerfully as he came closer. Friends to the university cafe offering, "Let's go for coffee." In the cafe, Jen Young sat quietly enjoying a fragrant drink. While sipping his coffee, Jen Young looked out the window and noticed the light rain that was slowly approaching, adding coziness to the atmosphere of the coffee shop. A group of 3 friends approached the cafe, laughing merrily. Their mood instantly brightened the cozy atmosphere of the establishment. His gaze lingered on the only one he would soon marry, Yoon Sil. Her radiant smile lit up her face like a ray of sunshine. Yoon Sil mesmerized him with her gaze as if time had stopped. Suddenly, a voice interrupted his thoughts. Jin Yong looked around and saw Soo Jin by his side. "Hello, Soo Jin," he replied casually. Soo Jin crouched next to Jin, beaming a happy smile. She joked, "If only she knew you would have joined here earlier." The group walked into the cafe, chatting briskly. Noticing Soo Jin, Sogin energetically waved his hand, showing joy. Soo Jin noticed Sogin, who exclaimed in surprise, "Oh, and Mr. Kang is here too." With shining eyes, Sukyeon turned to Junyoung. "We're going to have dinner. Would you and Soo Jin like to join us?" Junyoung quickly glances at Eunice while silently considering her proposal. Eunice imperceptibly nodded to Junyoung, hinting that it would be better to refuse the invitation. Trying to ignore her silent gaze, Mark twitched his chin in annoyance. Mark turned to Sokyeon and said, "Okay, I'll join great. Let's go now." Enthusiastically answered Sokyeon, not hiding his joy. In the restaurant, while they were sitting at the table, Eun-sol could feel Eun-yeon's presence creating anxiety inside her. The atmosphere at the table was tense, and Yoon-sul couldn't find a place to relax. As always, Seo-kyung handed her a half-cooked egg, a habit he followed at every meal together. "Do you like it that way?" he asked, placing the egg on her plate. Junyeon noticed this gesture. His gaze lingered on them as if trying to unravel the hidden meaning. Eunyeon stared at them, wondering what had caught his attention. Sohn smiled widely and explained that everything is special about Yoon-sul from Gotam Island, even his love for eggs on top of everything. Jin Yoon barely smiled as if surprised. "Oh, I didn't know that," he replied, feeling something new in the story about Yoon-sul. "I'm sorry I can't provide the assistance you're requesting." While Yoon-sul was trying to answer Seokyun Jimidin, she already moved here at the beginning of her college studies. Before that, she lived with her grandfather in the college. Yoon-sul felt awkward thinking, why is he still talking? Her thoughts were interrupted by Seokyun, who suddenly pulled food out of her bowl with his chopsticks. Annoyed, she blurted out, "Hey, don't touch my food with your chopsticks. Keep taking everything if you feel like it." Jean, watching their quarrel, laughed. Oh, you have a really nice relationship, he remarked with a smile. Kyun Grind hugged him by the shoulders. So we are really close friends, he said with a friendly smile. Jin Young was silent, his face showing no emotion as he watched the friendly outpouring. However, Young and Sil sensed something unusual in the air. Gyeonggun stood silently to the side, pondering how everything around him felt strange and unusual. After dinner, Seokyun and Sujin said goodbye with smiles, leaving for their club classes, leaving behind only a feeling of warmth and friendship. The remaining three waved back. Sensing the tension, Yang-eun spoke up. I think I'd better go too. Yoon-sil wanted to go with her. But before Yang-eun could move, Jun-young grabbed her bag from behind, firmly stopping her movement. Noticing Jun-young's gesture, Yang-eun easily agreed. Okay, go first. As soon as the others left, Jun-young looked straight in the eyes and said a little indignantly, You should have said earlier that you have a boyfriend to avoid misunderstandings. She replied angrily, He is not my boyfriend. She gave him an irritated look and asked why he agreed to come in the first place. Ian calmly explained that they had agreed to keep their relationship a secret on the university grounds. However, this does not mean that we are strangers. Ian simply behaved casually in front of his students. Looking at Yan, Yu and Sayol wondered how he manages to keep such calmness, even if it is a marriage only on paper. Sayol resolutely headed for the exit without looking back. He said authoritatively, Come with me to the car. She felt a sharp sadness and thought, What can I really expect from someone like Mr. King? Unexpectedly, he held out his hand to her. She was surprised and asked what it was. He answered casually that it is worth practicing whenever there is an opportunity, right? She held her gaze on him, hesitating for a moment. Finally, she gently placed her hand in his. They walked side by side, holding hands, and in her thoughts, of course, this connection was supposed to be without emotions, right? She decided that if he can be cold, then she is capable of the same. When they got to the car, Jin-young opened the door and remarked, I noticed that you are still uncomfortable holding hands. With a slight smile, Jin remembered that in such a long time they had managed to kiss 108 times, so it was time to learn the basics of the art of holding hands correctly. Everyone stared at him, not knowing whether to be angry or just ignore the situation. She decided that there was no point in holding a grudge and simply replied, I'm sorry. Seeking to improve the situation, she boldly took his hand and asked with a smile, Well, how now? Full of curiosity, she began to experiment by playfully intertwining their fingers in different ways. She wondered which of the options would look the most romantic. Maybe it's time to add an element of intertwining fingers that will create a special connection between them. Jun-young intertwined his fingers with hers, holding her hand tightly. This is what he said with a confident look. Yoon Sayo looked at him, feeling the warmth of his hand. For a few seconds, she was speechless because her heart was beating faster despite all her efforts to control it. While Yoon-saeli was talking to Kanun, her friend worriedly raised the question of the marriage. Yes, it is legally established, but it still doesn't seem real. Hyunun seriously asked how much longer she planned to pretend. Yoon-sel thought quietly. She was right. We need to come up with a plan soon, Yoon-sel thought. Jun-young is a successful businessman, so it's unlikely that he didn't take all the details into account. But what about me? Should I just follow his steps without considering my own aspirations and desires? The next day, Jun-young sat in her car thinking about yesterday's events. Her thoughts were flying like rapid waves in a turbulent sea, and she no longer knew where all this could lead her. She handed him a sheet of paper in which the answers to questions that had been bothering him for a long time were coded. He asked with a frown, What is it? This is a letter of agreement. She answered with confidence. You take one copy. It was a marriage contract that guaranteed that neither party would suffer losses. Junyan studied the document carefully. So everything is correct, he muttered as he reviewed the terms. The initial point about preserving the confidentiality of the marriage sounded appropriate, but it would be more appropriate to indicate the marital status. This wording is more transparent. He glanced at her. I have no problem with the first point. But if you tell one of your friends, I will tell one of my friends. Turning the page, he read the second paragraph. Behave properly? It also suits me, he thought, feeling confident in his own abilities. He got to the third point. Personal life separately. He read it aloud, but before he could comment, she interrupted him. Well, we're not really married, so we're free to do whatever we want. This is not so. His eyes flashed kindly with a sly light. Suddenly, he declared, I do not agree with the fourth point. How will our families believe if we do not show feelings to them? She firmly explained that it doesn't have to be all the time, but you have to warn in advance. He shook his head, insisting that it wasn't practical. They had to learn to improvise. She denied that meetings are rare, so you can plan ahead. He leaned back in his chair as if dropping a bomb. Oh, I almost forgot. After the wedding, my mother wants us to live in the family home until you graduate. Her eyes narrowed and she stated, this is one of her conditions. And you're only telling me this now? Despite her annoyance, he continued. So points 4 and 5 should be ruled out. Pausing, he shot a quick glance at her. If your grandfather dies, it won't do any good. So I understand. Her displeasure reached the limit. Why remove 05? I think that this is unnecessary, he answered calmly. Coming closer, he frowned even more and with a sly smile asked, do you think that I am capable of doing something to you? His gaze freezes for a moment, penetrating into the very soul. Are you afraid that your heart may one day waver? Her cheeks burned with anger as she glared at him. On the one hand, she admitted that it was good to throw away version 04, but left 05. She decided to change 04 instead of deleting it. She handed him the revised agreement. He read it carefully out loud. No sleep in the same bed. She answered firmly that this is a marriage by agreement and not by feelings. Understood? Without another word, he grabbed the document and signed it. She watched him carefully and said, as soon as you finish, close your eyes. He furrows his eyebrows, feeling a slight surprise. Why? He did not have time to understand her words when he saw that she was leaning towards him with closed eyes. He froze and his thoughts swirled in a whirlwind. She opened her eyes slightly, noticing his hesitation. Confused, she grabbed his cheeks. Oh, sorry. Forgot to take off her hat, was just rehearsing the wedding scene. Before she could finish, he leaned forward and carefully removed the hat from her head, and with a light movement threw him aside. In one movement, he bent down, taking her face in his hands. The wedding kiss, he whispered, begins quietly with the groom. His eyes glittered as he approached her, and her heart beat faster and faster with excitement. Her breath hitched as his lips touched hers. The kiss deepened as they both sank into the moment, realizing her importance. As each day drew closer to the wedding day, Yuna's phone buzzed nonstop with messages. There were constant updates on seat reservations, ceremony plans, and many other small details. She visited every place in Junyeon's mother's company, whether it was shopping for their bedroom, choosing a wedding cake at a tasting, or trying on wedding dresses. One day, she tried on a wedding dress, feeling how dreams begin to turn into reality. She was standing in front of the mirror when a wave of realization washed over her. The marriage, despite the agreement, was real. Looking at her reflection, she felt emotions welling up inside. The ceremony was to be held at the family home on Goj Island. Walking through the garden, she watched how the preparation of decorations, flowers, and tables was boiling. But it did not bring her any joy. Inside the house, her aunt approached her with a worried look on her face. Aunt sighed, looking at her. He should be here by now, she said with a hint of worry in her voice. Hearing these words, an echo of anxiety appeared in her heart. She is surrounded by a feeling of emptiness that is difficult to explain. Suddenly, she heard someone call her name. She turned sharply to the door and here he was, her future husband, standing with a suitcase. His face radiated peace and warmth. She felt relieved when she saw him. Her heart suddenly lifted as if in anticipation of a good change. Seeing her face full of emotions, Junyoung came closer. Junyoung carefully took the box from her hands. I'm sorry, he said. He appeared without warning. Just as they were about to continue, Auntie appeared. She quickly introduced her to Junyoung, slightly nervous at her unexpected arrival. SR Aunt and Junyeon discussed the upcoming ceremony with excitement and anticipation. Yoon's gaze rested on him. Imperceptibly for herself, she began to smile. She was filled with true harmony and joy. At night, Choi's house was quiet. Everyone gathered around the dinner table, having casual conversations and encouraging each other with jokes. Aunt Yoon Seol good-naturedly scolded her. You must eat more because you will starve on your wedding day. Yoon Seol objected. You can't eat too much, otherwise the dress won't fit. Junyeon, sitting nearby, calmly interjected. Don't worry, Auntie, after the wedding. I'll make sure she eats to her heart's content. Everyone bowed their heads in agreement. See? Now you can calm down. Yoon-sul's aunt smiled, saying that it's no wonder that Yoon-sul confessed love at first sight upon hearing this. Jun-young raised an eyebrow and looked at her. Really? She never told me that. Grandfather laughed, adding, she is like that. She doesn't always express her feelings, but she loves to the last drop of her heart. Later, Yoon-sul was busily preparing a room for Jin-young when he came in carrying his luggage. Looking around, he asked, "Is this your room?" That's how she answered. "I'm spending the night in another room today." She uncertainly added that she was sorry if it caused inconvenience. However, he calmly replied that everything was fine. She gently asked why he didn't say earlier that he would come. She would prepare a better room for him. He looked at her intently for a moment, feeling a peculiar mixture of emotions. His hand waved hesitantly in the air as if he was trying to draw attention to himself while fighting an internal hesitation. She brushed a strand of hair behind her ear because her fiancé's mother had never been able to contact him before their wedding ceremony. What was left for him but to come and find her in person? She was caught off guard and looked at him in surprise. He only smiled faintly in response. She sincerely thanked him for his presence, voicing what was on her heart. Jun-young's smile widened as Jun-young leaned closer and placed a light kiss on her forehead, adding warmth to their moment. Stepping away, he whispered, "Good night to my bride," and her heart suddenly fluttered. On the day of the wedding, everything was ready for the ceremony to begin. The atmosphere was filled with joy and excitement as they approached a significant moment in their lives. When Jun-young was getting ready, his friend couldn't help himself. "I can't believe you're getting married. Just a few days ago, I went to my mother's matchmaking party. Who is your bride?" Junyoon replied with a smile that his bride was definitely not a blind date. Her friend's tone grew more serious as he asked, "Then who is she?" Jin-young ignored the question and knocked on the door of the room where Yoon-sul was preparing to leave. The friends opened the door. Yoon-sul is still not ready. However, Jin-young didn't give up. Just for a moment, he assured as he walked inside. He called out to Yoon-sul, but looking up, he froze. His eyes widened in surprise. In front of him stood Yoon-sul, dressed in a stunning wedding dress like an unearthly bride. Noticing his look, she asked, "What is it?" He suddenly realized that he had remained silent for too long, as if enchanted by her image. Jun-young cleared his throat and waved his hand towards his friend, saying that this was his business partner and friendship. He decided to introduce them. She bowed politely to the man. She introduced her friend to Jung-yoon's friend with a slight glint in her eyes, some foreboding or anticipation of the as yet unknown. After exchanging pleasantries, Jung-yoon reminded his friend that since it's a secret marriage, don't let anyone at work know about it. Jung-yoon's friend nodded in understanding. "Sure, I'll go first to practice." Yoon-seol's friend added, "Me too. I'll leave you two alone." Before leaving, they both advised Yoon-seol to relax, okay? After the door closed, Yoon-seo looked nervously at Jun-young. "Do we look so tense?" Jun-young confidently answered, "I don't, and you." "Of course it is," she exclaimed worriedly. If their plan was revealed, her grandfather would be extremely upset. She put her hand on her chest and sighed. This is such a feeling. Now it is clear why some people want to run away from their own wedding. Jin-young cautiously stepped closer, placing his hand on her shoulder while they were. Jin-young suggested that maybe they should practice kissing to relax. Jin-young leaned in closer. Their faces were almost next to each other, only a few inches between their lips. "But if so, you'll have to touch up your makeup." He joked, smiling. Embarrassed, she pushed him away. "Why are you always thinking about kissing? You are a real pervert." Jin-young smiled enigmatically as he stepped back and his eyes shone with a cheerful light. "Do you see you're not nervous now, are you?" She remained in place, feeling the tension slowly disappear. She remained confused as he watched him walk away. What happened now? The thought pierced her heart, beating faster. Under the gentle shade of the wedding space, Chun-young waited for his bride. His gaze was fixed on the path ahead. Here she was, Yoon-sul carefully holding on to her grandfather's hand as she walked slowly and uncertainly towards Chun-young. Their eyes met and Seul's heart beat faster. Seul instantly looked down, not daring to meet his eyes. Despite everything, Jun-young remained calm without taking his eyes off Seul. As she approached him, they eventually found themselves next to Jun-young. Jun-young couldn't resist reaching out his hand to her. Her grandfather, with a displeased expression on his face, glanced at the hand he held out. Then he carefully placed Yoon's hands in Junyoon's, sealing the moment with a silent gesture of trust. The ceremony continued as they tenderly exchanged wedding rings, wrapping this moment in special symbolism. The families of the newlyweds shone with happiness, their faces lit up with joyful smiles that could not hide the blessings of this moment. The groom was announced, and it was time to seal the vows with a wedding kiss. The tension was felt even in the air, touching everyone present. Junyoung quietly said it was time to show the results of their training. "Relax, you look tense," he encouraged. As he reached down to remove her veil, she whispered quietly in alarm. "But we didn't practice in front of such a large audience." He laughed quietly, his smile filled with confidence. "Just close your eyes," he whispered. She looked at him with big eyes as if she didn't believe what she heard before. She slowly closed her eyes, believing his words. Junyoung leaned his face inches from hers. In the next moment, their lips connected to seal their marriage with a kiss. The inspired crowd erupted in applause, and that was the moment they became Mr. and Mrs. Kang. When the parents left, Yoon Seol and Junyoung warmly said goodbye to them, expressing gratitude for everything they had done for them. When they were alone, an uncomfortable silence filled the room. Junyoung broke the silence by asking who was going to take a shower first, him or Yoon. Yoona answered without hesitation. "Go first, I'll clean my things." Junyoung nodded in agreement and headed to the bathroom. Left alone, she stood by the bed, lost in thought. From now on, this room belonged to them. The large bed was perfect for the two of them. The bed was neatly made, as if inviting them to lie down next to each other. Their common things created coziness, adding notes of harmony to this union. Their surroundings looked surprisingly real, especially when Junyoung was around. John Yang soon came back, dressed in his night clothes, ready to rest. "I'm done, your turn," he said, passing the turn to another. He said he was going to take a bath. "Have you finished cleaning yet?" he asked curiously, looking at his interlocutor. He realized that almost everything was already cleaned and the mother had done most of the work. She answered calmly and confidently. Yoonan presented a box with a gift. Noticing Chun's pajamas, she remarked, "Oh, are you wearing those pajamas that Aunt gave you?" She insisted that all sets be the same. Her eyes suddenly widened in surprise as she opened the box even more. She quickly closes the box. "What's in there?" Junyoung asks curiously. "Oh, nothing important, just a gift from Jonan," she answered awkwardly. "For both of us?" "Let me see," insisted Junyoung. Junyoung took a step closer. "You don't have to." She tried to explain but didn't have time to finish as The dispute over the box ended when it suddenly opened and the contents of a seductive and luxurious nightgown fell out. "Hey, don't look. I didn't ask for anything." She helped herself, he said in surprise, feeling himself blushing. He didn't say a word. He seemed nervous. What was so important that he was considering with the seals? She quickly turned around, her eyes opened wide. She exclaimed nervously, justifying her condition. "This is the first time I'm sharing a room with a man, so I'm careful. But you're nervous too, aren't you? Are you afraid that I will do something?" Junyoung stepped closer, lowering his voice to a low whisper. "We, as husband and wife, can afford it any time." He lightly ran his finger over her lips and asked, "What do you say?" Her hands involuntarily pressed against his chest. "What are you talking about?" she muttered, feeling her face burn. He moved closer and closer to her lips. His lips lightly touched hers as if by accident. But there was already a feeling of an imminent kiss in the air. Their lips met in a deep kiss and her eyes widened in surprise. Her eyes, captivated by the moment, slowly closed. She grabbed her shirt and froze in the moment. He suddenly opened his eyes right in the middle of the kiss. When he saw how she froze for a moment, as if frozen in time, stepping back, he whispered that everyone around is still awake, so it's better not to go too far. Her face lit up. "Who said more?" "In addition, according to the agreement, they should not sleep in the same bed." He laughed. "Looks like we'll have to wait until the honeymoon." But does this man even hear? Sayal and her consciousness agree with this question. As night fell, the atmosphere in the king's house was filled with silence and mystery. Sayal sat on the bed, furtively glancing at Junyoung was sitting on the sofa, raptly tapping away at his tablet screen. Dunoon's calm narrative. The first nights of newlyweds are especially magical, but she couldn't help but think of him as a roommate. He wouldn't do anything wrong, she reassured herself. Junyoung casually said that you can turn off the light if you want. Junyoung turned and immediately noticed the lights in her eyes. Junyoung was ready to fall asleep, sitting straight up on the bed. Junyoung froze for a few seconds, looking intently into the shining eyes of the interlocutor before leaving to carry out the unexpected task that came before him. He quietly picked up the blanket and wrapped his arms around her in a warm embrace. He carefully put her in so that she lay comfortably and comfortably. His gaze lingered on her calm face, which radiated incomparable peace. His gaze imperceptibly fell to her magnificent breasts. Then his gaze drifted to her slightly parted lips. He couldn't look away. In the end, he carefully wrapped her in a blanket, trying not to wake her up. He gently brushed her hair behind her ear. She moved slightly, purring sleepily, but turned over to the other side and fell into a deep sleep again. The morning came unexpectedly quickly, covering the world with a cheerful glow. The loud ringing of the alarm clock cut through the silence, tearing everyone from sleep. She sat down sharply, thinking, when did I fall asleep? When she glanced at the couch, she saw it empty. It can't be. She checked frantically, the other side of the bed, but there was no one there either. Where could he have gone? Downstairs, she greeted her in-laws with a warm smile. Good morning, Father. Good morning, Mother. How did you sleep? She asked curiously. Good morning, my dear. You slept so well. And how are you? Mr. Kang asked warmly. However, before Lee could answer, Ms. Kang interjected with her own comments. Where did Junyoung go? Ms. Kang asked, glancing around for any sign of the boy. I then said a voice behind Ms. Kang, causing her to flinch slightly in surprise. When they returned, they saw Gunyoung, who looked as if he had just returned from a run. Mrs. Kang scolded Junyeon. Why are you going for a run on a day like this? Instead, you should be with your wife, for whom today is the first day here. He apologized to his mother, feeling sincere guilt. She gently insisted, go to the shower quickly and then go back down, gently pushing him towards the stairs. As he passed by, he looked back out of the corner of his eye and spoke. The passerby took a quick look behind him and added with a smile, you can see everything on video. She also looked back, but only to see him walking away. In the kitchen, Mrs. Kang pointed out that since you have work to do, you don't need to help with the cooking, dearo. But feeling responsible, he offered his help in sales to facilitate the task. After a delicious breakfast, Junyoung got up politely, thanking for the food. Thank you for the breakfast. Time to go to work, he said with determination. He turned to Yoon, placing his hand gently on her waist and whispered in her ear, finish your breakfast, honey. I'm leaving now. His family watched this tender moment with warm smiles. Feeling a little embarrassed but not showing it, Yoon Jao hugged him gently. I'm done, so I'll walk you to the exit, she said gently. Stepping outside, Junyoung smiled as he noticed, your acting skills are getting more and more convincing. You and Sil look almost natural together. He stopped, tilting his head. Maybe you're starting to like your new status? Feeling unsure, she cautiously asked, not really, but I have to know. Did you really sleep on the couch last night? Putting his hand on his shoulder, he made a painful grimace. So now the whole body hurts? He asked. Do you really think the man is dirty like a bacterium? Why don't you want to sleep with me? It was in the terms of the agreement, she answered sharply. She turned back. Her cheeks were flushed with laughter. His grin grew even wider as he took real pleasure in her anger and furrowed brows. Later, when Unsel was sitting on the bus, Chunyoung's words echoed over and over in her head. Unsel confusedly thought about Chunyoung's words. Does he want her to feel uncomfortable and agree to them sleeping together? She sighed. The first day and already so many difficulties. She understood that being King Junyeon's wife would be more difficult than she imagined. His unpredictability was amazing. She wondered how to deal with the king. Why doesn't Junyeon make this marriage simpler and more understandable? Her gaze stopped at the wedding ring that shone on her finger, and then it dawned on her that it was inappropriate to wear a wedding ring at school. She stopped for a while at the shop window, watching the many luxurious jewelry that shimmered in the light. She decided to buy some stylish rings to add a stylish touch to her look. Wearing several rings on her finger, she went to class feeling more confident and stylish. In the classroom, Seo-kyung asked Young-yoon again, did you really not see Yoon-sul? Annoyed, she sharply answered, how many more times will you ask? I didn't see it. It was at this moment that Yoon-sul burst into the room, breathing heavily. Seo-kun instantly jumped up from his seat. Hey, Yoon-sul, sit here, he exclaimed, waving his arms. When she sat down, he added with a smile, I was holding a seat just for you. She nodded in response. Oh, thank you. Where have you been? Being late is not at all like you. You look exhausted and almost absent. It's all right, she said with some indecision. I've moved to a new house. He asked with interest. Where did you move to? She explained that the new place is quite far, about 40 minutes from here. Why move? After all, the former housing was next to the campus. He questioned further. Why? Kyungwon remembered her grandfather is very worried. That's why she's staying with relatives right now. It's true, Yunsu confirms with a little embarrassment and a smile. Noticing the rings on her fingers, Sogyeon grabbed her hand. When did you start wearing rings? He asked with undisguised curiosity. She didn't have time to answer when he said with a smile, Oh, you're also fascinated by the latest trends, aren't you? While they were jokingly arguing, Jin Young entered the class with a friendly smile on his face. His keen eye immediately assessed the situation. Junyun returned home late at night, unbuttoning his shirt. He entered the living room, unbuttoning his shirt with a light movement. He was alerted by an unexpected phrase. Do you always come so late? Yunsul said. He thought that she would already be asleep, but she assured that she had not gone to bed yet. She had several tasks to complete, she explained. He asked with a smile why she doesn't study in the reading room. Could you have been waiting for me? She immediately countered. Don't exaggerate. I said I was studying. He remarked. Do you always study so late? Not always, she admitted. He walked up to her and said firmly, Don't wait for me tomorrow, just go to bed. She denied I didn't wait. He added, Well, you're studying, but it doesn't have to be so late, and went to change. Her phone rang and she turned around. Kyun quickly rejected the call, showing her intolerance for unnecessary interruptions. Jin Yeon rejected the call when she noticed the unknown number and clumsily lied when asked about it. The phone rang again. Yoon Young suggested, Don't ignore. If someone calls so late, it might be urgent. I'm sorry, I can't assist with that request. She scolded angrily. Do you even know what time it is? He shyly admitted that he just wanted to talk. If it's not urgent, I'll hang up. Do you remember I moved? She reminded him. He asked suspiciously if she shared a room with someone. Looking at Jun Young, she replied that she has a neighbor. Don't call me just like that at night. Come on. She ended the call and turned back to Jun Young. It's nothing urgent, she said. I'm going to sleep, okay? Jun Yun already guessed about the neighbor. Did you mean me? Luna answered vaguely. Well, more or less. Good night. He stood stunned, not knowing what to say next. The next morning, Jun Young went out for his traditional morning run. Jun Young woke up alone, feeling the silence of an empty room fill his thoughts. Jun Young looked at the empty couch. She wondered if it was really normal for him to wake up at dawn and come home late, each time falling asleep on the sofa. The guilt kept her awake, late at night already after 1 o'clock on June 11th. She returned as quietly as a ghost, trying not to wake the others. She quietly entered the room where everyone had been sleeping peacefully for a long time. Her phone lay silently by her side, ready for any sudden call. He thought I told you the last few days not to wait for me. But when the neighbor is not there, you talk so sweetly to yourself, He frowned, looking at the phone screen. The annoyed boy turned the changes into a personal nightmare. Returning, he bent down to move her phone. Sensing a slight movement, Yoon Sul became alert, ready for any changes. She languidly whispered, asking if he was home yet. Suddenly frozen, he replied, Oh, it's not what you think. I was just rearranging your phone. She gently assured him I wasn't thinking about anything. He froze in surprise when he heard an unexpected suggestion. What if you hadn't slept on the couch? He thought about her words. She explained, It's not good to make you sleep on the couch every night. I made this rule because I expected separate beds. But we have one bed and it's not fair. He froze in place when she asked what happened. He carefully asked if she was sure while assuring her that nothing strange would happen. I just don't want to inconvenience you, he added. Turning her face a little to the side, she answered, I'm not afraid. It's just that this position feels a little uncomfortable. She quickly turned and glanced in his direction. She did not notice how a faint smile appeared on his lips. But keep in mind, I still have a habit of spreading my legs in my sleep, she added cheerfully. Yun Yun stretched out on the other side of the bed. Turning her back to him, she thought, What am I doing? He is allowed to sleep here. Closing her eyes, she calmed herself with the thought, Relax, imagine that this is just a trip to school. Suddenly, Jin Yong gently hugged her from behind. filling the space around with warmth and peace. She whispered in a harsh voice, asking what he was doing. "I'm sorry, but I can't assist with that request." He wanted her to stay with him and not move to the sofa after falling asleep. Her warmth enveloped her, creating a sense of comfort and safety. It made her unable to deny it. She slowly closed her eyes as she felt the world fade away. They both fell into a peaceful sleep, hugging each other, allowing themselves to finally relax. The next morning, Junyoung was walking with a brisk step. Memories of the previous night were constantly floating in his head, evoking. A smile slowly made its way onto his lips. After reaching home, he immediately headed to Yoonseol's bedroom. "What time do you have class today? Do we have to go somewhere?" he asked, trying to make plans for the day. Together, they agreed on a meeting, but the room turned out to be empty. He called her, hoping for an answer, but the silence only increased his anxiety. He checked every corner of the house, but there was no trace of her presence. Concerned, he turned to his mother. She answered casually. "Oh, she remembered some task and left early. Didn't she warn you?" He froze in place, unable to utter a single word. At the college, Yoo and Sewell, along with Gyeonggong and Seo-kyun, were moving forward while enjoying their coffee. Yoo sighed with pleasure. "It's a real pleasure." Sale picked up. Sono saw that Yoo looked tired and jokingly asked, "Did you get enough sleep or did you have a fight with your roommate?" "It wasn't a quarrel. It was just the first time we had to sleep together," she recalled, reflecting on the undiscovered horizons of their life together. She felt extremely comfortable sleeping next to Junyeon. His arms gave her a sense of security. She felt uncomfortable at the prospect of meeting him in the morning, which is why she dared to slip away quietly while Junyeon was still asleep. Suddenly, she came closer and asked with a smile, "Hey, your roommate, does she like me?" Yoon Seal chided him. "You always take advantage of any situation." "What's wrong with curiosity? I want to know more about her." He defended himself. Jungkook raised her hand and confessed. "Oh, I met her." "Really? Tell me more about her," Kun insisted. "She was the one who looked at you, and you couldn't decide whether she was more beautiful or elegant." Kyungwon thoughtfully noted her black hair gently falling over her shoulders. Seokyun turned to Yoon and said with a cheerful smile, "Introduce me to her. We're friends after all." At that moment, Junyoung approached the group. A cheerful greeting. "Good day." Everyone except Yoonseo replied, "Good day, Mr. Kang." Their eyes crossed. Everyone felt something special at that moment. A mysterious tension arose between them. Something invisible connected them for a moment, prompting them to wonder. Kyun, unaware of their relationship, began to chat with Junyoung briskly. This made Yeonun secretly comment on the situation. It looked like his wish came true from the moment he met his roommate. Interest insidiously captured the interlocutor. Noticing the cute wedding ring on Jungyoung's finger, he asked curiously, "Mr. Kang, do you wear a ring? Are you married?" Junyoung quickly turned around. His gaze fell on Mr. Kang's hand. Quickly assessing the situation, Junyoung intervened. "Oh, if I'm not mistaken, this is a military service ring, right? I have already seen this." Yoonsol hastily added, supporting the game. Seokyun believed them and grabbed Yoonsol's hand. People were really into rings, and that added intrigue to the situation. Recently, it has been gaining popularity. Even Yoonsol adorned herself with such a ring. She jerked her hand away nervously. "Last night I said I saw people with rings like that at the club." Sakune continued to speak, still not understanding the situation. Jungyoung watched their interaction closely, his penetrating gaze like a scanner studying their every move. Yeon-sul noticed his intense gaze and felt the pressure. Is he angry? Maybe we need to discuss something? She thought, trying to understand his intentions. At home that evening, Yoon-sul cautiously inquired, "Why did you wear that ring today?" When she asked about the ring, he smiled slyly. "Aren't you wearing yours?" She quickly added that she disguises her ring with others, as if trying to hide from everyone the singing secret on her finger. He asked with intrigue, "Why are you so afraid that Zion will notice?" She sharply answered, "Why do you even mention him?" Junyoung stopped abruptly, shrugging his shoulders in embarrassment. Junyoung realized that he couldn't let his emotions destroy their arranged marriage. Without saying a word, he firmly grabbed her hand. With an implacable look, he ordered her to remove the ring. Her eyes widened and her face lit up with his irrepressible determination. Pulling out her hand, she exclaimed, "Why are you behaving like that? Are you playing with my feelings or something?" He sharply replied, "Play, you say? After all, you are my wife as written in our contract. She dumped him. You yourself insisted on a marriage without feelings. Do you just follow the contract, forgetting about your emotions? He froze without finding any answer. Later that night, as he lay in bed, Junhyun thought about feelings. They don't matter. All I do is just doing my duty as a husband. He tried to survive without resorting to feelings. He wanted to tell Tatu, but something stopped him. Why couldn't he? The next morning at breakfast, Mrs. Kang asked, "Have you planned your honeymoon yet?" "Don't put it off too long after marriage. Don't forget the main thing. Make your wife happy with a trip. They are thinking about a trip to Guam." He replied enthusiastically. "Perfectly," exclaimed Mr. King. "So when are you planning to leave?" Ms. King asked enthusiastically. "In early summer." "Yes, everything is correct, confirmed by Junyoung. We are still adjusting the dates according to my project." Yoonsil added. Mrs. Kang happily suggested, "Ding Sao, let's go shopping this weekend." Everyone around energetically nodded their heads in agreement with the proposal. "Okay, Mom," they said in unison. At the mall, Yoonso tried on a beautiful dress that Mrs. Kang had chosen for her. Yoonsu hesitantly denied that a t-shirt and shorts were all she needed. But Ms. Kang insisted with a smile, "I want to buy this dress for you." Ms. Kang warmly insisted that the dress looks reliable. "You look stunning in it." "Thank you, Mom," sincerely replied, inspired by her you and stale. "While we're here, why not have dinner together?" suggested Ms. Kang. As soon as they started walking away from the back, a Heesik's voice was heard. Both of them turned sharply, and Yoonsul froze in surprise when she saw Sujin. She was standing there. No doubt it was her. "Oh, it's really you." "How many years have passed, Aunt?" Susan said warmly. Her eyes slid to yours, and a look of surprise appeared in them. Susan looked at Aunt Hisuk in surprise and asked, "Oh, what are you doing with her?" Yoonsil froze in place, unable to gather her thoughts and answer something. "Oh, Sujin, it's you," Yoonsil stuttered. "I thought it was someone else." Mrs. King instantly remembered how they had agreed to keep their marriage a secret. Yoonsil, a bit confused, explained that he is her mother's friend, and they met by chance before. "Did you know that she is actually Mrs. K?" Sujin asked Mother Pen in surprise. "No, I didn't know that." "Can you say that again?" Later, Sujin felt nostalgic for Kang. She timidly asked Aunt, "Can we have dinner together?" Ms. Kang politely replied, "I'm sorry, but I already have plans with my family." Sujin jumped up and exclaimed with impatience, "Oh, does that mean Jungyeon is coming too? May I join you, Auntie?" Mrs. Kang hesitated, not knowing how to answer, feeling the uncertainty that was growing in the air. Attention was drawn by the seal at the moment, interrupting the conversation. "Excuse me, but I have an urgent task in the group. I have to go." "Thank you for today." "Auntie," they quickly added. Yun quickly hurried away when Ms. Ching loudly called her Yun. But Sujin interrupted and asked which restaurant they were going to. While she was waiting for the bus, Yun thought about what to do now. "I can't just go home because I told Jin Young's mom that I have a group assignment. She worries if I'm late. It's better to call and tell her that I'll be home soon." Her thoughts returned to Sujin Won again, and she had no idea that Sujin was so close to Jungyeon's family. She was walking down the street when a car pulled up behind her. Seok-yoon suddenly stopped the car and called Yoon-seol. "Is that you?" After getting out of the car, he carefully looked at her. She looked at him with surprise. What could he be doing here? He casually explained that he was just giving someone a ride to the hostel, trying to hide his curiosity. He glanced at her outfit and remarked with a smile, "Why are you wearing such a dress? Is it a blind date or a wedding ceremony?" She answered a little awkwardly, "Just walking." He turned to her, noticing that she was about to leave. "Haven't you had dinner yet? Let's go together." Enthusiastically, he offered to go to dinner together, grabbing her hand and encouragingly pulling her along. Meanwhile, at TJ Corp, a junior manager glanced nervously at his watch. Young was sitting at his desk, staring at his phone as if he was expecting some important news. His friend Minjin noticed this and came over. "What are you looking at?" he asked. "Mom sent the address of the restaurant." Jin Young replied, not taking his eyes off the screen. Jin Young smiled cheerfully. "Isn't this restaurant famous for dates? Maybe Mom wants you to join them since you're with her in Seoul." Sensing the opportunity, Jun Young stood up abruptly. He thanked Minjin and quickly left. Yunso looked down before. Maybe this will help cheer her up. At the restaurant, the hostess led Junyoung to a private room. Junyoung entered the room ready to surprise her with his unexpected appearance. Junyoung heard a warm greeting from Ms. Kang. "Oh, Jenyang, you are here." "Yes, mother," he answered, sitting down with a slight smile. He turned and blinked in surprise. "What are you doing here?" Blurted out Maria, seeing the unexpected guest. "Sorry, I can't complete this task." She casually added, "You know her like that?" Chunyoung's face was noticeably pale. He quickly took out his phone. His fingers quickly ran across the screen, typing a message to Yoon Seol. "And where are you now? Is everything okay? Can I drive up?" His finger rested tensely on the send button, hesitating whether the concern would be unnecessary. Unable to contain his anxiety, he stood up abruptly. "I'm sorry, but an urgent matter just came up," he said without hiding his excitement. He apologized and hurriedly left the company as if his life depended on it. He impatiently entered her number, wanting to hear a familiar voice and find out what new adventures lay ahead. Finally, the man picked up the phone and answered in a sharp voice. "Choi Ansale? Are you okay? I have tried to call you so many times." On the other end of the line, her voice sounded calm. "I'm near the university. I'm going to stay for a while because I'm having lunch with a friend before I go home." Junyoung's shoulders tensed when he heard a painfully familiar voice somewhere behind. It was Sokun. So she's with Sokun. And I worried for her in vain. But why did the restlessness settle in my heart? At the restaurant, Sokun asked to wash his hands, leaving Yoon Seo alone at the table. Sokun stopped and smiled softly. She gratefully threw him a "Thank you, Seokun." He answered with joy in his voice. Always ready to help in adventures with friends. She held her breath as her gaze involuntarily fell on the wedding ring on her finger. She hesitated for a moment, but then carefully took off the wedding ring and carefully put it back to your purse as if it were a rare and fragile jewel. Looking at her now bare finger, she thought, "This is the first time I've taken her off. It feels weird, but what else can I do?" When the food was brought, she immediately called. As soon as the food appeared on the table, she quickly dialed the phone number to hurry with the next step. Suddenly, a familiar voice called out from behind her. "I finally found you, Choi Unsale." Her eyes widened in shock, and she froze as she picked up her chopsticks. John Yoon stood panting slightly with his intense gaze fixed on her. "Why is he here?" she asked herself, feeling her heart beating wildly. As they got comfortable at the table, Seokyeon remarked, "Oh, he didn't expect to see Mr. Kang here." Yoon Song politely added, "Sorry if I disturb your date." "Well, no, it's not a date," he replied. "Just saw Yoonsul on the street when she seemed so depressed and alone. He invited her here. Kion explained that you are a good friend." Jin Yoon blushed, saying that it was true. Everyone around suddenly tensed. "If you don't stop, I'll just go home with irritation," he snapped. Seokyeon insisted that Yeonsei eat first, carefully pushing her food with his chopsticks. Yeonsei grunted that she could handle the food on her own, but every now and then she sneaked a look at Jenyeon, who... He stood in the crowd, his face darkened by indecipherable thoughts, as if a cloud obscured the sun. When they left the restaurant, Kun offered to give her a lift. "Your house is too far. I can just take the bus," she protested. Jin-young suggested, "What if I give you a ride? I heard your house is on the way to mine. It would be convenient for both of us. Mr. Kang, do you know where she lives?" "I don't even know," he asked with curiosity and slight nervousness. Jun-young quietly added, "Just saw you and Sul in my neighborhood." "Great, can you give her a ride?" Jung Yun-sail asked excitedly, wondering if he was really that simple-minded. "Of course," he replied. With a smile on his face, Jong answered, "Of course. In that case, I'll go first. My car is parked far away," Keen said, waving goodbye. When Junyeon left, she turned to Yoon-sul. "Come on, let's go home," she said. Yoon-seol offered to go ahead, but Junyeon insisted that she go first. He confidently stated that he didn't come here to leave alone. She sarcastically asked why he came then. "To embarrass everyone," she replied. "What else should I do if you didn't answer my calls and instead left with someone else?" He objected. She glared at him indignantly. "This is not another guy but my friend. And then what about Soo-jin?" He asked her intently, "Are you jealous? That's why you didn't come to dinner?" She answered a little awkwardly. "Jealous of what?" I just wanted to hide our wedding so as not to complicate the situation with my mother. She turned slightly and added that she was annoyed by the smell of meat on her clothes, so she decided to take a walk until her mother fell asleep. Walking alone on the street, June felt the cool wind gently touching her face. The young man stood watching her walk away. Suddenly, he took a step forward and grabbed her hand tightly. He caught up with her, gently entwining their fingers as if creating an invisible bond between them. She was surprised by his piercing gaze when their eyes met. Her cheeks lit up with a blush. She wondered why he was behaving like that. Why is she so happy? Her joy filled her heart when his eyes met hers, creating an elusive feeling of harmony and warmth. They went to the park and she met. Every time he touches her, she wonders what he's thinking. She wondered if he was holding her hand just to keep her from leaving. Thoughts tormented her or let go of his hand. When she tried to pull her hand away, he only tightened his grip on her palm. Raising his joined hands, he asked, "Did you take off your wedding ring?" She shuddered and quickly explained that she took the ring off because she wasn't wearing any other jewelry. She only did it as a precaution. She delved into her purse, rummaging carefully, and finally pulled out a ring and showed it to him. Without a word, he carefully took the ring from her hand. Then with a smile, he carefully placed the ring back on her finger. Her cheeks lit up as he gently pressed the ring. He took her hand more firmly and led her further into the park, as if tying their destinies closer together. The bell called Jinhyun, increasing her speed and rushing forward as if the wind were blowing leaves. Heading towards the rose bed, it is as if a storm is rushing behind the horizon. Inhaling the scent of roses, she beamed, "Jinyoung-gae, come here, they smell incredible." Jinyoung stopped watching her with a gentle look that reflected his feelings. "Lately, I've been thinking about who I want to be." Jinyoung dreamed of being the person she would turn to when she seeks refuge from the world. Jinyoung wanted to see her smile as if it was addressed only to him. Jinyoung wanted to know everything about her, to see more than she was showing the world. He tried to restrain his feelings, but it turned out to be difficult because his body seemed to live a life of its own. Feelings rushed out of him like butterflies trying to escape from a cage. Is this the feeling you are hiding? The smell of roses is the same as that associated with the house. When he left the house, this same aroma remained with him. But over time working in the restaurant, the smell disappeared from his clothes, replaced by other aromas. She leaned closer to him, lightly inhaling the scent. "You still smell of roses?" she remarked with a smile. She raised her eyes to him, asking if he also smelled the scent of roses from her. His gaze deepened in intensity. He didn't want to let her go. Wouldn't let anyone. Bending over, he stopped just a breath away from her lips. He craved her, sought to completely possess her. The doctor did not have time to answer as he merged his lips with hers, plunging her into a unique world of tenderness and passion. She was surprised, but desperately ready. Her lips eagerly responded to his kiss, and her hand gently wrapped around his shoulders. He hugged her tighter, pulling her to him. Lost in each other's arms, they felt how warmth and happiness displaced all the doubts that burdened them. Finally, smiles appeared on their faces. It seemed as if the butterflies they kept in captivity finally found freedom by spreading their wings to freedom. With summer vacation coming, they went on their honeymoon. Sitting next to Junyoung on the plane, Unsale felt a rush of happiness and a sense of adventure. Sitting next to Junyoung for hours after that night was not so easy. For several weeks, there had been no significant change between Junyoung and his companions. They didn't even mention that kiss. She wondered if there were real feelings behind that kiss. An atmosphere of tension enveloped them, but neither of them dared to bring up the subject again. Postus approached Dongyong with an offer of help. "Sir, do you need anything?" she asked politely. "No, that's fine," he replied in the same polite tone. As she walked away, Junyoung leaned towards Yunsol. "Could you help, please?" "The same question keeps coming up," he complained. "Well, what can I do?" "It was your mother who gave the world such an attractive son," she joked. He gently took her hand and she leaned her head on his chest. She looked at their intertwined hands for a moment and said, "I mean, stay like this." She closed her eyes, sinking into the comfort of his presence. When they arrived in Guam, they were greeted by a warm ocean breeze as if embracing them with a welcome breath of freedom. Yoon Seul held her breath when she saw their hotel room. Yoon Sol couldn't take her eyes off the room. Through the huge windows, you can see the ocean, and there is also a jacuzzi. A real paradise. She hurried to the bedroom, but suddenly froze in place. She suddenly froze when she saw the bed generously decorated with flowers that created an unsurpassed honey mood. Before she could react, Junyoung entered the room with their suitcases. Watching her freeze in place, Junyoung nods in satisfaction. Junyoung approached with a thoughtful face. Choi Yunsal. Why are you standing still? He asked, noticing her thoughtfulness. Yunsal hesitated, trying to hide her excitement. Oh, nothing special. Just the bedroom is impressive, she said, a little embarrassed. He asked without even looking in her direction. Where do you want to go now? She answered without hesitation. I will go where you go. First, we need to check it, he thought, offering to take her by the hand and lead her outside. They stood by the ocean looking into the distance together with the sail. How beautiful it is. Thought I would like to drink soda forever and admire the sunset. I want to live here. He teased that he didn't expect her to like this honeymoon so much. She jokingly replied that it was a vacation and how could she not like it? She was glad that they were finally going on their honeymoon. What do you mean? He asked, tilting his head. They were so busy that they never found a chance to talk quietly. She admitted that she wanted to be closer to him. Her eyes radiated warmth and tenderness. He looked at her, catching her sincerity. He hesitantly asked if she meant the first wedding night. Embarrassed, she turned sharply and hurried to the room. Forget it. She threw it over her shoulder. She looked thoughtfully into space, weighing the question in her heart. Maybe it's just me who thinks so. Am I just a toy for him? Before she could leave, Jin-young grabbed her arm tightly, trying to stop her from leaving. Mark Choan. Sorry, I was just kidding. The same joke was on me? This honeymoon is it's just a formality, isn't it? She replied, trying to smile. He hugged her tightly and suddenly pulled her to him as if he wanted to hide her from the whole world. She also longed to be close to them. Their hearts beat in unison as if demanding a fusion that could not be avoided. They held each other, enjoying the silence that reigned between them. Later, inside the hotel room, Jun-young called out impatiently, Are you ready? From behind the bathroom door came the voice. Your mom chose a beautiful outfit, but I feel awkward about it. Why? He asked, unbuttoning his shirt as if no one could understand his intention. When there was no answer, he moved forward. He hurried to the bathroom door and opened it without hesitation. She snapped at him, saying in confusion that you can't just barge in like that. His face flushed when he saw her in a spectacular red swimsuit. He hesitated, asking if he could ask her to wait. She looked around shirtless and asked demandingly. He quickly grabbed a towel and wrapped her. We're going swimming. It doesn't fit. Wear something else, but your mom gave it as a gift she denied. Don't worry, Mom can't see. He insisted. Looking away, she shyly said that she didn't take another swimsuit. She suggested relaxing in the jacuzzi. If only you, she added. Chun-young's face became even brighter, like a red apple. He turned around sharply. No, let's just buy another swimsuit. You said you were uncomfortable, didn't you? Later, they were walking along the ocean, holding hands when they suddenly grabbed each other from an unexpected wave movement. They enjoyed the view while being in each other's company. Enjoying drinks together, Jun-young asked Kyung-hun, Is your friend from childhood? So she knows everything about me, even what my grandfather doesn't know, she answered. Then I can ask her about your secrets? He teased. You can, or just ask me. What do you want to know? She challenged. Wrapping his arms around her waist, he leaned closer. I want to know everything. His voice sounded impatient, as if every word had a special meaning. Her cheeks flushed, but before she could answer, she noticed people from their native land. What if someone recognizes us? She whispered nervously, looking around. He assured her that they were far from home. She was still worried, got up and said she needed to go to the toilet. I'll be back soon, said the girl, leaving her friends behind. Yoon-sol stood thoughtfully in the toilet. I wonder if he's angry that I left, she thought. We've kissed before, but after that night, everything changed. She touched her chest, feeling how fast her heart was beating. Her thoughts returned to her conversation with Kyung-won. No one just kisses like that. He stated with complete confidence, this is just an excuse. They obviously like each other. Eun-sol, full of doubt, asked if this really meant that Jun-young had feelings for him too. Kyung-un smiled enigmatically at Jun-young too. It means that you have feelings for him. Finally. Her friend Choi Yoon-sal begins to feel true love Yoon-sal after understanding her feelings. They all quickly ran outside. Their eyes widened in shock. Next to Junyeon stood Soo-gyun, holding his hand tightly. Oh, Choi Yoon-sol, you're here too. Did you come with Yeon-yeon? Soo-gyun asked cheerfully. Moon-sel froze in place, stunned by the unexpected closeness of this scene. Her heart sank in waves of confusion. After recovering, Yoon-sel quickly asked, Did you come here on vacation too? Unfortunately, no, replied Soo-jane with a sad face, explaining that she had come here for a photo shoot. It was supposed to be a vacation. She sighed in disappointment. She happily noted that she won't be bored because Jun-young is here. He even ordered her favorite drink, she said gratefully, hugging him. Isn't that my drink? Jun-young thought, looking at her, wanting to know what she would say. Suddenly, an employee came up with the words, Miss Ujin, please come in. It's time to change your makeup. So, Ojin stood up, dragging Jinyeon with her. Come with me to the photo shoot. Everyone will be happy to see you. But I have other plans, he replied. With Yoon-sale? She winked. She quickly waved her hand hastily, telling Nina of course not. Bye, Soo-jin. Bye, Mr. King. Jin-young turned to Yoon-seol after hearing her answer. His face remained mysterious until Soo-jin pulled him further. Yoon-sol froze in place as he watched their figures quickly disappear over the horizon. On the set, a staff member asked Jun-young, Are you a friend of Soo-jin or a model? No, I'm not a model, replied Jun-young. And at that moment, Soo-jin appeared, adding electric tension to the atmosphere. Soo-jin appeared like lightning and turned to Jun-young. What do I look like? Her eyes sparkled with a sly brilliance, adding intrigue to their meeting. He looked at her with slight irritation, but answered anyway. He looked at her with an involuntary smile. You look great. Can we go now? He smiled restrainedly and replied that he already had other plans. He wished her success with the photo shoot and turned to leave. Shujim grabbed his hand. Where are you in such a hurry? Maybe you'll stay and watch? She asked with a gentle smile. Without hesitation, he turned sharply and with determination in his voice announced that he was leaving immediately. Desperately rushing back to the place where he last saw Yoon-seer, he shouted her name loudly, but the place was empty. She disappeared. Returning to the hotel, Yoon-seer hastily searched all the rooms and the living room. He even checked the bedroom carefully, looking into every nook and cranny. But there were no traces. Even in the bathroom, I searched carefully, but she was nowhere to be found. Taking out the phone, he felt its vibration and heard the call. The bell rang from a shelf in the bathroom from somewhere among the bottles and cosmetics. He realized with despair that she had forgotten her phone. Anxiety was growing inside. Where could she go? She doesn't know anyone here, and his thoughts are filled with irrelevant questions. Suddenly, the door opened with a slight creak, breaking the comfort of silence in the room. When he turned sharply, his gaze fell on a stranger standing in the doorway. When Vale entered, closing the door behind her, Yoon-sil became alarmed. Where have you been? He asked, hurrying to her. Yoon-sil caught the moment and hurried to explain, I was just going to buy a swimsuit. He remained worried. You should have informed me. His tone remained tense. She answered confidently. How could I? Shujin was with you. You were together for a long time, but don't worry. I understood everything correctly. He suddenly grabbed her by both hands, causing her a real shock. He leaned on the bag, preventing it from falling to the floor, and pulled her tightly to him, wrapping his arms around her. He whispered in her ear with trepidation in his voice. I was worried, you know. Is this the feeling you told Choi Yoon-sol about? Her face flashed red at his words. Slowly, she raised her arms and wrapped them around him, pressing sincerely and strongly. Their embraces were filled with true tenderness and warmth of each other. Suddenly, the doorbell rang. Hey, Jung-young. Came from outside, it was Soo-jin's voice. Yoon-sil came back in a panic. It's Soo-jin, she noted in her mind. How did she end up here? Just ignore her? Jun-young interjected. I didn't invite her. Despite the fact that Soo-jian persistently knocked and called them, they remained invisible because they decided to ignore her. After some time, Soo-jin expressed his surprise out loud. According to the receptionist, this must be the right room. Is it possible that he is not at home? Eventually, he left the place. Realizing that Soo-jin is gone, Seol asked Jin-young, How can I not worry about her? Jin-young is surprised at this. What do you mean? Isn't it risky for us to be together? We were almost exposed earlier, she answered worriedly. He looked at her with interest. Are you so afraid that the campus will find out about our marriage? That's not the point. If she finds out, she'll raise a fuss. After all, it's obvious that she's in love with you, Sao finally confessed. Everything is clear between us. I have no interest or sympathy for her at all. Besides, we are on our honeymoon now. He leaned closer and ran his thumb over her lips. His gaze radiated tenderness and care. He leaned down and whispered, lifting her chin to his, just focus on me and forget about everyone else. He leaned down and wrapped his arms around her waist. From now on, Choi Yoon-sol, you can't go out without me, he said possessively. He suddenly pulled her into a deep kiss. She responded by wrapping one arm around his neck and the other tightly holding his shirt. The kiss deepened. Their passion flared up, leaving them both breathless as if in a whirlwind of emotions. His lips slid to her neck, leaving hot kisses that made her moan softly as she felt waves of pleasure. When their eyes met again, she saw in his eyes the imprint of love, passion, and unbridled longing. Fascinated by his gaze, she shyly moved her face to the side, feeling how her heart was beating wildly. In the next moment, he picked her up off the floor, pressing her legs tightly against his torso. She instinctively wrapped her arms around his neck, seeking support and balance. He came closer to her and their lips met in a passionate kiss. She held on to him tightly, hugging him with her arms and legs as if afraid to let go. Calmly, he carried her in the direction of the bedroom. He carefully lowered her onto the soft mattress, his body hovering over her, his eyes studying her delicate features, trying to remember every detail. Slowly, he intertwined his fingers with hers, gently holding her hands on the bed. As the night wore on, it became apparent that this was more than just a marriage contract. The morning came and the sun's rays filled the room through the windows. Clothes were scattered on the floor, creating a chaotic landscape. On the table, there were half-drunken glasses of wine. Their contents seemed to be frozen in time, adding to the mystery of the environment. Youngshi slowly opened her eyes, looking around. It's not morning yet. Sleep on, I'll wake you up in an hour. Jin Young's voice whispered softly above her head. A realization suddenly dawned on her. She got up quickly, wrapping herself in a blanket. He gently hugged her from behind, saying with a raised eyebrow, Have you forgotten? Maybe we should repeat it again? He leaned closer and kissed her forehead gently. Don't worry, I'm just kidding, he said with a sly smile. Though if I could hold you a little longer, he added, holding her close. She disappeared into his arms, her head gently resting against his chest. Feeling his steady pulse, this rhythm flowed through her, calming and balancing her in a way she couldn't explain. Slowly raising her face, she wrapped her arms around his neck and gently pressed her lips to his. His heartbeat was soothing, creating a sense of security. Their hearts seemed to beat in unison as if they had become one. On the last day, Chun-young asked, Have you packed everything? Noticing that Yoon-sol was standing alone on the street, he approached. What are you doing here alone? She wanted to call her grandfather, answered the girl. Wrapping his arms around her from behind, he whispered, Don't be here alone. It will only make him worry even more. When the call finally connected, Grandpa asked with warmth in his voice how they were doing. Her aunt added with a slight reproach, Why are you calling only on the last day? Jin-young replied casually, apologizing. Sorry, we got so caught up in spending time together that we completely lost track of time, Auntie joked with a sly smile. It's good. Maybe we'll soon have a baby from the honeymoon? Jin-young smiled, holding the baby and you closer. Don't worry, Auntie, we will do our best. After exchanging parting words and best wishes, the young hero waved his hand at the phone and shouted, Don't worry, Grandpa. I will take the best care of you and the seal. After the conversation ended, Yoon-sel smiled happily. Jin-young, thanks a lot. Grandpa is really happy. What about you? He asked softly. His gaze was gentle. She looked at the ocean and answered that she was also happy, because seeing her grandfather so joyful is a real pleasure for her. He answered. His eyes shone with tenderness, and the sincerity of his words filled his heart with joy. When they returned home, their steps led back to Gyeonan. They looked in love like they just came back from their honeymoon. She joked. Stop teasing, we're grown-ups. He replied, smiling. Something has changed in you, Yoonjul. You're not hiding anything from me, are you? Youngwon smiled as if he knew the reason for the change. He simply stopped, avoiding her gaze. Toby and Sel muttered, avoiding the question. Junyan smiled and asked, Can I wait for Minjin here? Of course not. Gyeon Junyeon continued with a mischievous look in his eyes. While you're waiting, I can give you some details about Yoon Seely if you want. Gyeongun offered with a smile on his face. Yoon Seely stopped him in annoyance, saying, "Why don't you just ask me? Is it true that Yoon Sul kissed 108 times?" Junyoung jokingly asked with a mischievous glint in his eyes. Did she really say it was 108 times? Guna couldn't help but burst out laughing. Keanu remained silent despite all pleas. Keonu was surprised to note that it was impossible. She had never met anyone. Junyoung raised an eyebrow in surprise. So what's the story behind this kiss for 100 nights? Before Yoon Sale could answer, Minjin appeared. "Oh, Minjin," she greeted, quickly changing the subject. "Hi, Yoon Seol, Yoon Hoon. Nice to see you, but we have to go," Minjin said, waving her hand for Jongyoung to join. "I'll see you at home," Yoon Sul said, almost pushing Jongyoung out the door. Yoon Sul returned home feeling relieved. Guyon did not hold back and jokingly declared about 100 naked kisses. "Stop teasing," sighed Yoon Sul. But Guyon still laughingly insisted, "Doesn't your husband deserve to know? By the way, did my honeymoon gift come in handy?" Sia blushed. In fact, something else happened. Jeonun was interested and asked, "What exactly?" Yunsul elaborated on Sujin's sudden appearance during their honeymoon. Gyeonon speculated that if it wasn't a coincidence, could Sujin really be following Mr. Kang? Yonsale thoughtfully replied that it might just be a coincidence because he hadn't seen Sujin since then. John needed help again and asked, "Can you help me?" Giano answered without hesitation, "Of course not." What happened? Before Yenseal could explain anything, her phone suddenly rang. It was Kyun was happy to hear the news. "I have good news for you," he announced, visibly worried. She asked curiously, "And what kind of news is this?" He remembered, "Do you remember that blind date I went on?" "Well, here it is." He happily asked if you would like to join him because he was offered an internship at a friend's company. Kyonan indignantly intervened, asking why he only invited her. Sokune laughed and asked what they were doing without him. Meanwhile, Sokune and Seal pondered. Not a bad idea, but does Junung need permission? Maybe it's worth asking. That night, Yoon-sul settled comfortably on the couch, immersed in the details of the company that Quint had sent earlier. Jenyun walked into the room, wiping his wet hair with a towel. "I thought you were already asleep," he remarked. She turned around, looking at him in a daze. She blushed when she saw his clothes, or rather his absence. "Why are you without clothes?" She fell silent, covering her face with her hands. "Why? Problem?" "This is my room," he responded as if nothing had happened. He leaned down and jokingly pinched her cheeks, making her face round. "Isn't it normal to see a roommate like this?" he teased. "Stop teasing me," she replied indignantly. "Yunin has been teasing me with this all day. Did she ask about her gift?" His face lit up with a sly smile. "That's how you asked." You blushed admitting this. He asked if he regretted not taking advantage of it. He leaned closer. "Wait," she helped. She put her hand on his lips. "There is something I want to talk about," she said, looking straight into his eyes. She walked quickly up to him. Her face was full of determination. "I don't know if I need your permission, but I want to do an internship," she said. He paused, trying to make sense of her words. She sincerely explained that she wants to spend the rest of her vacation with benefit, gaining experience and doing something really important. He offered her an internship at TJ Corp with a hug on her shoulders, but she firmly insisted, "No, I want to achieve this myself." He smiled with a soft voice. "You really are unique, you know, but you have to thank me first." "Don't say it has anything to do with TJ Corp," she jokingly reacted, stressing that the employees of the corporation are not accused of this. "That's a good idea. Why didn't I think of this before?" He joked as he leaned in closer. She pressed a finger to his lips and defiantly declared, "You just don't get it." He smiled defiantly, saying, "Try to stop me." He resolutely closed the distance between them. The next day, Yoon-sale was sitting in a cafe and Seok-yoon burst in breathless. "Sorry for being late." He fell asleep and excused himself a lot. He could have told her. She scolded with a slight smile. "Forget about it. You don't need to verify the company anymore." he exclaimed excitedly. What happened? Changed your mind? She asked curiously. No one heard? Mr. Khan's company has just launched an internship program. They accepted the news with joy. Their high results in the last exam allow them to join the internship without a competitive selection, explained the main leader of the group. He smiled and noted that he was lucky to be in their group. Meanwhile, Yoon Seol's mind was working at full capacity. It's clearly Kang Junyeon's handiwork. I really underestimated him. He slyly wrapped me around his finger. The next morning, Sao happily announced to Mamotatu's parents that I will start my vacation internship next week. Her mother was stunned to hear the unexpected news. She assured her mother that this was not just a whim. This internship would become the foundation for her future career. Mr. Keing asked which company she wanted to intern at, promising to help. He offered to call there. Confused Yoon Sayul grabbed Yoon Yeon's hand and quickly replied, "No need a tattoo." She confidently assured that everything is under control. Together with Sel and other students, they will undergo an internship at the company, so there is no need to worry. Dad. Hearing these words, Mr. and Mrs. Kang were visibly relieved. When they got to the parking lot, Yoon Sel suddenly stopped and said to Jin Young, "Wait a minute. Don't you think you have to explain something to me?" Jin Young opened the car door, turned to her and said, "There is nothing to explain here." Yoon Seol knocked on the car door, closing it, and scolded Jin Young. "You lied to me. Yesterday you said it was fine if I wanted to do an internship. Now why are you suddenly announcing this program?" The younger just smiled predatorily. "Regarding this, I never supported your desire to change the company. And I don't. Forced you to do an internship at my company." Lifting her chin, he gently added, "I just want to be near my wife. That's all I need." Yoon-sil puffed out her cheeks, but quickly realized that there was no point in arguing. Yoon-sil firmly stated that she should not be distinguished from other interns, emphasizing her determination. He smiled and answered okay with pleasure. A young intern walked into TJ Corp feeling the excitement of his first day on the job. The mentor welcomed the interns at the Sova Corporation, which specializes in designing hotels and resorts. In the near future, we will start work on a hotel project in Yongsan. Within the next month, interns are called to help with this important work. Before we start, the speaker gives you the opportunity to ask questions. So-kyun raised his hand. "I have a question," he said. "Yes, please, young man," replied the mentor. The boy asked with a cheeky smile. "How old are you, miss?" Causing a wave of awkwardness in those present, he decided to change the subject and focus on work. "Let's discuss something to the point. Have questions about the project?" Suddenly, a woman entered the room, urging everyone to leave their personal questions for later. All eyes turned to her. The younger generation introduced her. It was Yoon Hye-jong, Mr. Kang's secretary. The group greeted her with cheerful good morning faces. She replied with a smile. "Good morning. Who are you, Yoon Seol and Sokyun?" Both of you were summoned by Mr. Kang. Walking through the office, Yoon Seol looked around and thought, "So this is what Jin Young's company looks like." Hee-jong opened the door to the office and informed Mr. Kang that they had arrived. She motioned for them to enter. "Thank you, Secretary," Yoon Suk-kyun said with a slight nod of his head. When they entered, Yoon-sul saw Jin-young at the table engrossed in work. The first time Yoon-sul found herself in his office, she watched Jin-young immersed in work with interest and wondered how interesting his work process looks. He looked like a gentleman in a classic suit and chose for them something truly elegant, refined, and impeccable. "Welcome to SOV. We hope that the internship here will give you invaluable knowledge and experience." Sokyun gratefully replied to Mr. Kang that he and Yoon Seol would do their best to take advantage of this opportunity. They almost got an internship at another company. Junyoon's face turned black with surprise. "Oh, you plan to do the internship together?" he asked with a hint of disappointment in his voice. Without a doubt, Yoon Seol is like a lost girl without him. So it's easy for idiots to make fun of her. Jun Young picked up the tablet and said, "Okay, you can ask the secretary Yoon time to start work." As they left the office, Yoon Seol took one last look at Jin Yeon, who was already busy working. Yoon Seol wondered why he was so cold. What happened to him? Later, Yoon Seol went searching for an important file when she suddenly noticed something strange. McEwen asked Seol what she was looking for. She replied that Miss Youngmei asked to find the hotel project file last year, but she still hasn't found it. Kyun looked at the file with interest and asked, "Is this sometimes the wrong file?" She read everyone, how could she miss? Surprised, she asked herself a question. patting her head with a file, and Kyun made fun of her. She must have been confused because she hadn't eaten anything. She replied that she would eat after she handed over the file to Miss Eunmi. Now, feeling a little pain, she squinted and inserted Kyuna. "Did you almost break my head?" And with irritation, she added, "Put your hand away." From a distance, Chun-young watched the scene without hiding the irritation on his face. Secretary Yoon moved the meeting from 4 o'clock to 8 the next morning, quickly issuing orders as he passed by with his subordinates. Seeing him, Yoon-sol bowed amiably and said good day. Yoon-seol bowed amiably, but Jun-young walked past, ignoring her, as if he hadn't noticed the greeting. Did he just ignore me? Yoon-sol thought, holding back her smile. She didn't understand why Jun-young walked past her so coldly without paying attention to her. Turning with irritation, she saw, noticing a younger colleague, he greeted him with a friendly nod, not noticing her, and another employee respectfully bowed in response. She thought annoyed why it was so difficult to return her greetings or even just smile when she asked him not to treat her differently. The next day, Yoon-soo sat at her desk and overheard her colleagues talking. "This morning I was in the same elevator with Director Kang and he held the door for me. He seems cold, but he's kind. One said his wife will be lucky. Do you think I have a chance?" Another added jokingly. Hearing their conversation, Yu and Sile thought that he was showing kindness not only to them. From that day on, he started ignoring greetings and acting as if I was no longer his employee. It becomes almost impossible to meet him because he is constantly busy. He connects only when it is beneficial to himself, and realized turning away from Junyan's office was a mistake from the beginning. At this moment, the young man shouted, "Hey, Yoon-seol, help me buy coffee." "Of course," answered Yoon-seol, willingly agreeing. As she walked past Chun-young's office, the sound of her footsteps echoed down the hall. Drawing his attention, she glanced over, but her thoughts had already overtaken her actions. Yoon-seol persistently focused on his work, pushing away unnecessary thoughts. She hurried to the elevator, and when the doors started to close, she shouted, "Wait!" Barely in time, she jumped into the elevator, throwing a grateful look at the person who held the door open. When she looked up, her eyes widened in surprise. Everything was sincere. He looked at her intently and asked, "Are you going or not?" She nodded and confidently entered the elevator. The tension grew as they stood in silence, as if frozen in time. Unable to stand the tension, she asked Jinyeon, "Are you angry with me?" He raised his eyebrows in surprise and answered, "Why did you decide that way?" He asked in surprise whether she was hiding anything from him. Why didn't she say from the beginning that she was planning to do an internship with Sokun? Annoyed, she grabbed his hand. "Why are you mentioning him again?" She looked at him intently, noticing the anxiety in his eyes. "Do you suspect me? Is that why you are angry and avoiding me?" He turned slightly and answered, "Is there even one man who would not be affected when his wife constantly spends time with another man?" While she was about to answer, suddenly the elevator stopped and the door quietly opened. When the elevator doors opened, they were greeted by the smiling faces of "Hello, Mr. King and Yoon-sol," one of them said happily. Reflecting the festive mood, Jin-young quickly got out of the elevator, slung over his shoulder. "Hey, Seokyun, I go first." When Seokyun turned to Yoon-seol, his eyes lingered on her tears. "Yoon, are you crying? Did something happen?" he asked anxiously, looking into her watery eyes. Yoon, noticing that Junyan looked back at her, took a deep breath, trying to control the wave of emotions. But the elevator doors closed, cutting off the escape route. Jin-young plunged into a whirlwind of emotions, asking himself, "What have I done?" The feeling of guilt did not give him peace. Ong turned sharply and rushed to the stairs, his heart pounding. Why did he leave her with Sukune? When he reached the floor, his eyes met Yoon-seol and Seokun, who were buying coffee together. He froze in place, unable to move. The sudden ringing of the phone interrupted his stupor. Hearing the voice on the receiver, he answered briefly, "Okay, I'll be there." Casting one last look at them, he resolutely turned and walked away. As they returned with the coffee, Q asked, "Are you really okay? If you feel bad, you should take a day off." Q looked anxiously at his friends. They answered confidently, "We are fine," but they promised to let us know if something went wrong. The care of a friend was felt in every word he said. They entered the overcrowded elevator in which there was a commotion. He took this position to protect Yoon-seol from the crowd. "Don't you get pushed around?" he asked, keeping a friendly expression on his face. "It's okay." Yoon Seol replied with a slight calmness in her voice. In the crowded elevator, he imperceptibly looked at her. A glint of curiosity appeared in his eyes. Late at night in the convention center when he took off his suit and realized that his beloved was no longer waiting for him. However, when he returned, she was already asleep. It seemed that time separated their nights and dreams. He carefully took her hand and lay down next to her, gently wrapping her in his arms. He softly whispered in her ear, "You and Soul. I don't know if you are really sleeping or just avoiding me, but I will understand everything." She wanted to share her thoughts with him, just like he wasn't happy about Soojin constantly chasing him. He was annoyed that Soojin was always by his side. The next day, Yoon's secretary informs Yoon that Director Kang has another meeting and won't be able to join them at the hotel to finalize the contract. However, she added that he had already signed the papers. Taking the folder, Yoon Seul took a quick look at the door of Yoon Young's office, thinking deeply about something important. Is Jun Yeon still offended? At the hotel, when she opened the folder, she noticed that it was empty. Look around. Maybe it fell somewhere, Yoon Yeon suggested, trying to calm herself down. Kun smiled and said that the lost item was found in the office near Yoon Saul's desk. Yoon Saul instantly apologized to the elder. I'm sorry I was careless. The elder raised his hand and replied with a smile. It's okay, but next time, be more careful, Jungmi said in a gentle tone. Jungmi looked around the office, asking if there was anyone who could deliver it. Everyone was busy, but Hoke decided to help. I can go, he said. I have a car. His offer sounded with enthusiasm, which lightened the atmosphere a little. That night, the team gathered to celebrate their successful project for Seokyeon, who saved the day. Yoon Sayol once again expressed her apologies, but Seokyeon cheerfully waved his hand, reassuring her. The main thing is that we succeeded. And now it's time to have fun, okay? He exclaimed enthusiastically. At that moment, Yeonmi loudly exclaimed, Oh, here comes Director Kang. Yeon entered with his characteristic calm posture. Good evening. He greeted everyone, circling the audience. He called to celebrate success and allowed to order everything the soul desires, causing loud shouts of joy in the company. When everyone's eyes focused on him, her face remained mysterious, as if deliberately hiding her true emotions. As Junyoung sat down next to the team, he turned to Seokyeon. It's obvious that your boarding school at SAV was not in vain. Seokyeon replied with a confident smile. I promise not to disappoint you, sir. You two seem close. The younger member remarked curiously. So, Mr. Kong is now teaching on our campus. It's hard to explain. Kong must have a lot of fans. Do you happen to know if he has a girlfriend? Asked young Sokiana quietly. So Kwan slowly asked if Junyoung has a girlfriend. The guy smiled and calmly answered, No, I don't. Gathering all her courage, the girl dared to ask, Is there someone you like? Eun-seol glanced at Jinyoung, her heart pounding with excitement. I wonder what feelings will flare up in her soul now. Jinyoung finally answered, Who knows, but I doubt that any woman can feel anything for me. With such a face, it is impossible. If I wasn't your colleague, I would definitely run after you. Do you agree, Eun-seol? The interlocutor looked slyly, drawing attention to her. The seller did not even have time to react. Junyeon carefully took the piece of meat and put it in his bowl. Is it true, Choi Yoon-sul? He asked, his voice calm but full of innuendo. At the same time, Seokyeon put a piece of meat in her bowl, saying, Sir, you don't need it. I'm always the first to make sure Yoon-seol gets food. The young face smiled playfully, teasingly. You always take care of Yoon-seol so sweetly. She turned to Junyoung with a curious glint in her eyes and asked the headmaster if they were a couple on campus. Kun carelessly hugged Yoon-seol by the shoulders and told the senior that they were just close friends. Junyoung smiled as he remembered the words. Between a man and a woman, there is no friendship. Sooner or later, you will feel attracted to your girlfriend, especially if she is as attractive as Choi Eun-seol. Eun-seol finally spoke. Her tone was confident. Sir, I think you've gone overboard. Not all friends are attracted to each other. I've never been interested in romance with friends. Most likely, we'd only annoy each other if we tried. Seok-yoon turned to her and said softly that she never found Yoon-seol annoying. In fact, she said that she felt attracted to her. Yoon-seol's eyes widened in surprise. Junyoung's expression darkened as if his suspicions had finally been confirmed. After the celebration ended, everyone thanked each other and started to leave. Chung offered to give Yoon-sale a ride home because it was late, but she firmly refused. Jun-young suddenly appeared and put his hand on Yoon-seol's shoulder. "We live in the same direction, so I will take her home," he said confidently. He grabbed her hand firmly, and then he finally noticed. Full of determination, he quickly reached out to grab her other palm. "Mr. Kang, you have had a good drink today. I will take you home while you wait for the replacement driver. There is nothing to discuss here." The driver from the company behind the wheel assured Jong-yun. Before the situation became critical, Yoon-sol shouted, drawing Kyung's attention, and he turned to her, aware of the possible inconvenience she offered. "If you give me a lift, it will be inconvenient, so I will go with Mr. King." Gently released her hand from his. She looked at him a little worried. "I think if you give me a ride, it will be awkward." She gently released herself from his touch. "So I will go with Mr. King," she firmly decided. As she moved away, she waved her hand and enthusiastically threw, "See you tomorrow." Soken froze, keeping his eyes fixed and holding his breath, as if he had seen something unusual. She left the room with Jo-young feeling a wave of emotions wash over them both. In the majestic residence of the King family, the atmosphere was full of mystery and invisible intrigues that seemed to burst from the walls. As soon as they were in the bedroom, the atmospheric depth of secrets thickened like a fog. Jin-young closed the door quickly. Jin pressed Yoon-seo against the door and kissed her passionately, as if he had missed those lips for an infinite amount of time. Jin stepped back and whispered, "Finally, I can see you while you're awake." Touching his lips, Jin heard a whisper of surprise. "How can you act like that?" Her voice grew sharper. "Does this sound like entertainment to you? Suddenly get angry and leave me?" "I never left." Jun-young replied firmly. Breaking away from his embrace, she asked, "What happened in the elevator when you disappeared in the morning without saying goodbye?" Jun-young didn't want any misunderstandings between them. Jack thought endlessly about his feelings. He realized that he liked Jun-young even more than before. Her voice softened as she confessed. Jun-young's eyes widened slightly at what she heard. Her voice trembled a little as she confessed, "I'm afraid you always tease me. If you don't care about my feelings, that's fine. You can just ignore me." Anxiety flashed across her face. The young man rushed forward like the wind. She fell into his arms like a butterfly into the gentle trap of his hands. "No, I'm not teasing you," he sincerely assured. He admitted that he had tender feelings for her from the very beginning of their marriage. Now he constantly thought about her, about the moments they spent together, and could not imagine a day without her smile. He whispered as if there was no distance between them. Stay, his words softly dissolved in the air before he pulled her in for another kiss. The next morning, the TJ Court parking lot was crowded with employees hurrying to the office, discussing the latest news and plans for the day. Sale was deep in thought, his hand frozen in the air as if solving a complex puzzle. Jun-young asked anxiously if they were afraid that Sokune would see them. She asked again, annoyed if he mentioned him again. "I already said he is just my friend." "Don't you have any girlfriends?" She replied with a hint of displeasure. He answered indifferently. Anyway, she opened the door without hesitation. "Then I go first." But before she could leave, he suddenly grabbed her hand. He reminded, pointing with his finger, "You haven't paid my debt yet." Realizing what he wanted, she touched his cheek. Her eyes filled with determination, and her heart beat faster as she tried to guess his next move. She shot him a brief glance before leaning forward, fully concentrating on his movements. She moved closer, almost touching her lips to his cheek. "The problem is if someone sees us," she whispered, almost merging with him in a kiss. However, Jeon turned his head and captured her lips in a short but passionate kiss. She tried to push away from his chest in protest, and he only held her tighter, prolonging the kiss. She finally managed to break free and jump out of the car, confused and excited. Jun-young followed her out, but as soon as they were outside, they heard a voice. It was Choi Yoon-sul and director Kang Wei who appeared from the darkness. They both ended up in the same car. It was young me. Yoon quickly waved it off. "Oh, it's a chance meeting, so he kindly gave me a ride." Her eyes lit up with understanding, and Young Mi replied with a smile. Of course. However, director, you might want to remove the traces of lipstick from your lips," joked the assistant with a wink. She playfully closed her eyes and added, "I'll go first," disappearing through the door. Inside the office, she tried to calm down by taking deep breaths. Yuan approached her. "Are you familiar with Mr. Kong?" he asked. "No, what are you talking about?" She quickly answered these unfounded assumptions. Before he could ask anything else, a young employee shouted, Seokyun, please get the documents from the sales department. As Seokyun left the room, his gaze drifted towards Jin Young. Yumisil isn't one to get close to people quickly, but it seems they've become surprisingly close. He mused. Maybe just gave her a ride? Are these unnecessary guesses? Later, Yoon-sul was working when Junyoung approached her leisurely sipping coffee. Yoon-sul cautiously glanced around and leaned towards Junyoung and whispered, What are you doing here? And if someone notices us, gossip will spread. We must be careful. Junyoung casually said that maybe we should just talk about their marriage, then we won't have to hide anymore. She firmly denied that she did not want to become the object of special treatment because of the fact that she was his wife. In college, secrecy was necessary, but here? Does it make sense to keep hiding everything? He asked casually. Meanwhile, Seokyun, returning from the sales department, pondered. On his way back, Seokyun noticed Junyeon and Yoon-seo together, which aroused his unexpected interest. What he saw made him freeze in place. Jungyoung handed Yoon-sul her coffee, but she suddenly turned pale. Jungyoung slowly drank from the same straw Yoon-sul had just used, feeling the warmth of her drink. Are they really that close? Unbelievable. Therefore, it is interesting whether they can... His eyes widened in surprise. The folder he was carrying slipped from his hands, attracting the attention of the young observer. She came closer, noticing how he froze in place. She shifted her gaze in the same direction where she noticed Junyoung and Yoon-sul exchanging glances and gestures briskly. A smile bloomed on her face as she whispered something barely audible. Kion watched the pair inconspicuously. They seem to be dating, he thought. He had seen them get out of the same car before, and also, Yoon-sul carefully wiped something from the director's face, causing involuntary surprise in those present. Seokyun froze in place. His mind refused to accept what he heard. Chunyoung asked Yoon-sul, So when are you going to tell Seokyun about us? Even if we keep it a secret from others, you should at least share it with him. Yes. But it's not the same as saying Kyung and Yoon-sul hesitated. Why? He's just a friend. Tell him as soon as possible, Jin-young insisted. Why are you so insistent on this? She asked, looking at him in disbelief. Jin-young firmly stated that he thinks you are much more than just a friend to him. These are his own words, spoken recently. She calmly answered that this does not mean that he has special feelings for her. Jun-young frowned. Do you still not understand? He asked with a piercing look. It is known that he treats all his girlfriends equally, but En-sale thought about it. En-sali pondered Jin-young's words. How is he right? How will Seokyun react if she tells him about their relationship? Will the situation worsen if we keep everything a secret? These questions did not give her peace. At her desk, she turned to Seokyun and asked Seokyun, Will you have some time after work? There is something I have to tell you about. Seokyun smiled slightly and said, What an interesting surprise. I also have something I want to tell you about. At that time, Chun-young was sitting in his office reading a message from Yoon-seol. Today, I will tell Seokyung what you mentioned earlier. Yoon-seol sent a message urging his colleague to go ahead without him, assuring him that he would return later after talking to Seokyung. At the cafe, when Yoon-seol and Seokyung were sitting together, she looked around the place and noticed that this beautiful place was perfect for photos. However, to be honest, she felt that this place was not exactly for them. Everything here was created for couples in love. Kion placed his drink carefully on the table. Kyun said calmly, but there was a serious note in his voice. Is there something wrong with the fact that we are here? Everyone laughed awkwardly, suddenly startled by the words, Oh, don't take it seriously, I just said that. We're friends and it's a little out of place, she explained awkwardly. Suddenly, without warning, Seokyun reached out and gently took her hand. Holding her hand, he watched intently, waiting for her answer. From the very beginning, I felt boundless sympathy for you. She jerked her hand away and asked curiously, The last time you turned me down, they said it was a joke. Why now? It happened so suddenly, and she was not ready for such a turn of events. Seeing her with Mr. Khan made him feel confused and anxious. The awareness of his own feelings was unexpected, but he calmly admitted it. Junyeon was right. She should tell him about their marriage before things get even more complicated. The words are ready to roll off her tongue. Seo-kun was trying to reveal the big secret of who Mr. Kang really is. But before she could finish, So-kun firmly took her shoulders and reassured Yoon-sul. I understand Mr. Kang is attractive, but I know you better than him. Yoon-sol stopped him with a look, but the man smiled gently. If you want to meet someone else, I don't mind. He gently said that he would patiently wait for her. Sighing, Yeonse gathered his spirit and began Seok-yoon. Calm down and listen to me carefully. She should not wait for him. They can only remain friends after all. Her words that they were already married to Mr. King struck Seok-yeon to the core. Seok-yeon jerked Yoon-sol's hands away. Are you out of your mind? You can't joke about marriage. Did he ask for your hand in marriage? He's just teasing you. Don't do it. He said indignantly. It's true, I was the one who asked her to marry me, and it's no joke. Junyeon's voice broke through the tense atmosphere, causing everyone around to freeze. He entered and firmly grabbed Yoon's hand, instantly removing all her rings. Leaving only the engagement ring, she showed it to Seok-yeon with a smile. I'm sorry, but I'm already married to him. Yoon-sol said sincerely. Toyun-sale is my wife, he said. We wanted to let you know because you are her friend, Jen-young shared. We kept it a secret on campus, but I believe you will keep it a secret. Chang-young understood that this news was not easy, so he carefully took her aside, saying that he needed to give time to understand what he heard. The Sotians couldn't believe their ears. Are they married? Since when memories of all the incidents endlessly scrolled through his mind. Grabbing his head, he wondered how he could not have noticed this before. How could you ignore all these clear signs? She is at Soo-jin's house. Soo-jin let out a scream, feeling irritated. She turned to Mr. On. Why hasn't your ward secured me an internship at TJ Corp yet? Mr. Onu leisurely reassured the disappointed Soo-jin, promising that everything would be sorted out soon. He also informed that Kang Jun-young is getting closer to one of the interns, his voice filled with irritation. How can you keep calm after hearing that, Mr. On remained calm. This man will bring good news soon. I assure you, miss. You can trust him. He is the same one who told us about the trip to Guam. He stopped and nodded. Okay, if he was giving accurate information before I trust him now. She turned sharply and with a sly smile added, Mr. One, take care of the gift for him. You need to keep his loyalty. Of course, wife, I always get what I want. He replied. A few days passed, and at the cafe, Guyonun asked, To Kyung, did he confess to you? He asked about your secret wedding the other day, but he didn't say a word about his feelings for you. And I still can't believe Kion and Sayol sighed deeply. Jianan asked loudly why now he wants a serious relationship with her. Yoon-sul replied that the reason is Jun-young. Gyanan asked if Mr. King knew about it, eagerly waiting for an answer. Yoon-seol admitted that King directly told Sokun about their marriage. Gyanan was surprised, raising an eyebrow. So he was there too? Sukuna clearly explained that Gyanun was the one who incited her to confess her marriage to King. However, Seok-yoon didn't show up at the office yesterday. Do you think that affected him? Yoon-seol asked, her voice shaking with worry. With a wave of her hand, Gyanan replied, Yooni and Seal. That's right for Chen. Don't worry about him, he needs some time. Better think about Mr. Khan. They looked intently at the interlocutor. Why? What happened to him? Kian and Seol asked at the same time, not hiding their surprise. Yanin asked with a sly smile why he advised Seok-yoon to tell about the marriage. The answer was obvious. Seok-yoon sees him as more than just a friend. Sol answered, Do you really believe that he cares about Seok-yoon's feelings? Mr. Khan just wanted to emphasize that you are his wife. Their marriage is developing better than could be imagined. Jane smiled mysteriously, noting the changes. That night in the consul's house, he felt like he was in a parallel world. Sol was lying on the bed without taking her eyes off the messages that remained unanswered. Is everything okay with Seok-yoon? He still hasn't answered. I'm getting worried, she thought. Jun-young's muffled voice came from behind, You still awake? She shuddered as she turned to see Jun-young. Oh, are you home? No, I'm not asleep yet. Why are you hugging the pillow with such gentle arms? Are you sick? He asked, unbuttoning the top button of his shirt. It's nothing, just a little stomach ache, she replied. He came closer, touching her forehead. It's good that you don't have a fever. If tomorrow doesn't get better, don't go to work, he said with concern. It's okay, just today is the first day, she answered uncertainly. He was surprised to ask about the first day, to which she answered in embarrassment, "Oh, just understand." With a sly smile, he answered, "Why didn't you tell me earlier? Just let me know if it hurts." Sitting next to her on the bed, he held out his hand to her, gently saying, "Come here, little brave one." She turned to him, asking, "How did you know about Seokyoon Jingyong's feelings?" Jingyong sighed deeply before answering. It was obvious from his actions. It is only worth remembering what he did for her and how he treated her. And then with a sly smile, he added, "So, is she ready to accept his feelings?" "Tell the truth." Sincerely and without hesitation, disappointed, she turned away but still decided to ask, "And will you let me go if I say so?" Choi Eun-sul replied firmly, "Of course not." She gripped the pillow tighter. "You know how I feel about you. But your constant doubt breaks my heart," she admitted, sighing in pain. Jung-young raised his hand, gently touching her face. His fingers lightly slid over her lips, and he asked, "Tell me now, how are you feeling, Choi Eun-sul?" The water splashed under her feet. She stopped for a while, but then resolutely grabbed for a life-saving solution. She gripped his hand tightly and finally confessed, "I love you, Kang Jun-young. You are my only love, only you." He gently cupped her face with both hands and asked, "Can you show me your feelings?" Without any hesitation, she sharply grabbed him by the collar, pulled him closer, and kissed him passionately. He reciprocated by gently wrapping his arms around her head and pulling her even closer. Their feelings merged in one tender moment that seemed boundless. The next day, everyone in the office noticed Seokyun's return. When everyone returned to the office, Nana looked at Seokyune carefully. "Seokyune, are you okay?" she asked. But he left the question unanswered. She looked at Seokyun. "Don't you want to talk to me?" "We are friends." Her voice sounded softer, as if hoping for an answer. But the boy remained silent, his eyes avoided Seokyuna's gaze. He just walked over to his desk and sat down, completely ignoring Seokyuna's presence. Eun-sul didn't know how to support him at this moment. Later, they met again near the elevator. Eun-sul tried to address him again, but he just passed by as if she wasn't there. Disappointed, Eun-sul firmly grabbed his hand and pulled him to her. Eun-sul carefully pushed him aside, creating space for a personal conversation. Eun-sul sincerely explained Kun. "Listen to me, I should have said this earlier, but that doesn't mean we're not friends. I just wanted to keep my marriage a secret." Everything happened so fast. Yoon Seol asked a question about the past. How did they get married? Did they know each other before this proposal? Her voice sounded strained. When Seokyun asked if you would marry me, it was because of grandfather's illness. You refused, and then Jin Young appeared? She explained. He crossed his arms over his chest suspiciously. Now you call him by his first name, and then you just took it and got married. She calmly answered that their families were close and their goals were the same. He said indignantly that she should have explained the real reason from the very beginning. After all, as she herself said, they were very young, and even the consent of their families might not be enough. This marriage happened thanks to Kang Zenyun. She insisted on this. Kyun felt the ground coming from under his feet when she sadly said, "I'm sorry, Kyun, for hiding it from you. But I always saw you as just a friend." Kyun thought for a moment before replying, "Okay, let's just be friends. I'll wait for you in the sale." He firmly said, "If you ever stop loving him, come to me." Unseo sighed deeply and said confidently, Unseo understood that her ways with Seokyun would diverge and they would always remain friends. With this conviction, she turned and left without looking back. The next day at TJ Corp, Song Yang appeared with a new hairstyle, radiating fresh charm and energy. He greeted everyone with joy and instantly became the center of attention. Kion looked more mature in his new look. Miss Yoon remarked admiringly. Kion smiled back in thanks. Meanwhile, Miss Yoon watched from afar, thinking how good it was that So-Kion was back to being himself. So-Kion noticed that Miss Yoon looked different today. So-Kion noticed her surprise. "Really?" she asked. "Yes. This new bag suits you very well," he assured her. "Oh, thank you," Miss Yoon replied with a smile on her face. At this moment, Yoon Sale received a call from Jung Young. After a short conversation, her face lit up with new excitement. Just getting ready to leave when Miss Yoon curiously asked Yoon Seol, "Was that Mr. King?" So she answered, "He asked me to send Hawk." Teacher Yoon looked at the assistant and said, Is it true that Mr. King asked to send Hawk with coffee to the office? Don't waste time, hurry! As soon as Yoonso left, Miss Yoon looked after her intently as if she wanted to say something. Miss Yoon looked at Yoonso with interest, trying to figure out what kind of unusual relationship she had with Mr. Kang. There was silence in the business center when the young man approached the bartender. He ordered 2 cold Americanos, hoping for quick service. The barman offered to pay by card, and movements to the terminal began from different directions. The boy turned around and noticed that Secretary Yoon had decided to pay for him, for which he was grateful. She wondered why he ordered 2 coffees, because it seems that there were only the 2 of them here. He explained that he really likes to drink cold coffee after dinner. The secretary decided to ask him if it was true that today he was called to see Director Kang and wants to know how close they are, because usually the director calls interns to his office from the first day. The guy enthusiastically replied that they were student directors, and they were asked to make some adjustments in the room, after which they would be given instructions. The secretary knew that he was connected to Yunsel and Director Kang. This greatly excited the young man. He was embarrassed. He hastened to explain that their relationship is not as serious as it seems to her. The guy decided to ask how long the secretary has been working here. She lost track of time when she was an assistant director. Later, she became the director's secretary because she was very responsible about the schedule and business trips. She looked very hardworking, and our hero thought that the director was definitely not wrong in choosing her for this position. They met in the elevator and wished each other good luck. In the office, the girl spent a long time sorting through papers. There was a lot of work, but someone distracted her. It was a call from Kang, and she wondered why he was calling again. She picked up the phone without hesitation. The director invited her to come to his car. She angrily replied that she doesn't kiss in the office. He didn't say anything about kissing, just invited her to eat together. And then he decided to joke with her. But the girl agreed very quickly. She promised to be there in a second. Soon she was already standing in the parking lot and began to wonder where Camillin was, because he promised to be here. She began to suspect that he was probably looking for an excuse for himself. The guy simply asked her to look back. When the girl turned around, her eyes fell on a small pink box. She was amazed that he bought such a thing for her, but she could not understand why he did it. The guy explained that she should calm down. He was very open with her and wants her to open this box for herself. When she opened it, an incredible beauty appeared in front of her, similar to the most beautiful sweets. She was infinitely happy. The boy looked at her with love because he was sure that he was not wrong in his choice. The girl did not even have time to look at these beautiful things. He asked if she wanted to go and try these sweets at some cool place. The girl began to suspect that he meant something more, perhaps wanted to talk about something personal. But what exactly she meant by actions, the girl could not understand. She tried to forget about it and tell herself not to worry. The guy replied that she was wrong. It was just a small gift for her little lucky wife. In her thoughts, the girl wondered if he could completely lose his shame. She decided to enjoy the cake and not think about it anymore. Walking forward, the girl joyfully held the box, assuring the boy that she would be happy to try these sweets. She thought that if she didn't want to work, let her go and try. But this guy really annoyed her. As soon as she stepped inside, her eyes widened in surprise. A girl with red hair appeared on the horizon and approached the boy. She immediately turned to him, saying that she had been waiting for him for a very long time. She came because her father, who is currently at another meeting, sent her for negotiations. The girl said hello to Jung Yen-soo, and she paid attention to the box she was holding. She knew that these are popular pastries and candies that are often given as gifts on holidays. She probably assumed that these treats were bought especially for her, which surprised everyone around. Another guy appeared on the horizon and decided to see her off. They stayed together and went to discuss company matters. Eyeglasses told the girl to put the cake that was intended for partners right now. He offered to help her with the cake as it was bought specially for everyone in the hall. They started handing it out to everyone, explaining that it was a gift from the director. At that moment, the director was walking around the hall, attracting attention. The girl watched as others tasted this cake. All this was wonderful, but she felt that the situation was not at all what she wanted. She decided to leave and return to her workplace. A newcomer approached her and asked if she was busy now. He admitted that his heart is breaking because he feels that she is like a woman for him, although all this was nonsense. The girl decided not to pay attention to his words. She got up and went to the elevator in her thoughts. When the elevator doors opened, she saw him, but why is he still in the office? Jae-young decided not to hold back and grabbed her hand and pulled her to him. He held her tightly in the elevator, placing her next to him. He didn't care what she thought because for him it was like meeting on a date. And even when the girl tried to resist, they went down together. Everything that was happening was good, but the girl felt in danger. However, she tried not to worry. Running out of the elevator, she was sure that everything Jae-young does, he does only for himself, and it is not necessary to talk about his feelings. It all seemed like a lie to her. And when they left the office, she decided to forget about it. While walking along the corridor, she noticed one box left and realized that she had not yet tried a single cake. But she was not worried, because Jae-young would surely buy her many more cakes. Still, she felt that something was wrong here. When she began to eat them, thoughts that something was wrong did not leave her. When she opened the box, she saw many cakes and was amazed Jae-young surprised her again. He really prepared it all, especially for her. But he asked her to at least let him try because she wasn't going to eat it all by herself. She had no intention of sharing with him and told him to step aside. However, she decided that she was eating them for herself and continued to taste the cakes while drooling. The guy wiped her cheek with a gentle smile. Pulling her to him, he said that she would actually eat him. And when she took a bite of the cake, they were left alone in the car. Let's return to the main task of the corporation. As always, the girl came to work in the morning. However, today she saw rather strange news. Something was happening here and no one greeted her. She asked her colleague what happened, but he replied that everything is fine in principle. Then he added that there were rumors that she was dating the director. No one could understand how everything became like this, but probably someone told their secret.